In a world where omegas accidentally cross into normal society, what kind of sparks will fly with men? On a stormy night, a young man dragged his weak body into a pharmacy. His face was flushed. "Hello, please give me an omega suppressant spray," he said. The young lady was completely puzzled. She had never heard of what he was asking for, but seeing that he seemed very uncomfortable, she wanted to recommend a similar medication. The young man refused. Just as he turned around, a man walked in. The young man nearly collapsed from weakness. The man caught him just in time. In this close encounter, the young man smelled a woody fragrance on the man. Thinking he was an alpha, the young man thanked him for his concern and then stumbled out of the pharmacy. The man asked the young lady about the young man's situation. She said she wasn't sure, only that he looked very unwell. Seeing the man had come to buy Hawthorne pills again, she reminded him that it's medication. "This isn't something to snack on," says the man upon receiving a voice message from a child, who apparently wants some Hawthorne pills. Since the man works with medical devices, the young lady asks him about omega inhibitors, but he hasn't heard of them either. It turns out that the young guy wanted to buy them. Remembering his appearance just now, the man thought he was just drunk. However, the young lady didn't smell alcohol on him. Hearing his recent voice message with a child, she only felt it was a pity. That such a handsome man married at a young age. Outside, the heavy rain continued, despite it being a red light. The man noticed someone walking straight out and fortunately pulled him back in time to prevent the young guy from getting hit by a car, while his pizza also scattered on the ground. It was then he realized it was the young guy from the pharmacy. Recognizing each other by scent, the young guy also realized it was the same man. Now at his limit, he had no choice but to seek the man's help. The man smelled a strong scent of alcohol on the young man and asked if he was feeling unwell, but he shook his head. When asked if he needed to be taken to the hospital, the young man wanted to go home instead. The man thought he meant to his own home, but in fact, the young man wanted the man to take him back to his place or to a hotel. Because he couldn't book a room without his ID, he started to sway as soon as he finished speaking. Then his vision blurred as if he was drunk. At this moment, the man's driver came over. Seeing him actually bringing along a man, the driver was shocked. Then, the man handed the young man over to the driver. Telling him to take the young man to a hotel, the driver was baffled. Hearing the man was about to leave, the young man quickly stepped forward to hold him back, pleading for help. With this back and forth, the driver didn't know what to do. Just then, the man's phone rang. The call was from the nanny because the child wanted to talk to him and hadn't gone to sleep yet. So the man was busy talking to the driver while comforting the child on the phone. Just as he was about to hang up, the child, looking hopeful, told the man that today's test paper needed a parent's signature, but the man asked him to have the aunt sign it. Hearing this response, the child instantly felt dejected. At that moment, the man realized the driver was still behind. It seems the lad was unwilling. Thus, the man began to get a bit impatient, but seeing the lad's demeanor, the man was at a loss. Which is the nearest 5-star hotel? The lad was stepped on the foot, followed by the man's cold interrogation, "Who sent you?" Previously, due to the lad's persistence, the man had no choice but to personally take him to the hotel. The young man was directly thrown onto the bed by him. "Speak! What exactly do you want to do?" The young man struggled to get up, his eyes deeply gazing at the man in front of him. "Sir, give me your pheromones." As the young man moved forward, the man quickly dodged, causing the young man to fall directly onto the ground. Seeing the young man's state, the man directly stepped on him. "Who sent you?" The young man looked aggrieved. "No one." At first, the man just saw that he was uncomfortable and wanted to help him. He didn't expect him to be so ungrateful. He thought the young man wanted money, but the young man said he didn't want money. The man thought he was sent by a competing company. He had heard that those people would use unscrupulous means. He didn't expect that they would use this method. The man told the young man to go back and tell those people to stop using such despicable tricks. After saying that, he turned to leave but noticed a noise behind him just as he was about to open the door. The young man immediately lunged forward, hugging him and pleading for some pheromones. At this moment, the man was already angered, grabbed the young man's hand, looked at him sternly, and told him to let go. Unexpectedly, the next second he received a kiss, seeing his determination. The man was no longer polite, immediately pinched the young man's chin, who could no longer care about anything else. In order to keep him, he had to fight for it. This time the man didn't push him away, and the young man felt his glands being touched. He immediately blushed and quickly pushed the man away, just realizing that the young man didn't even know how to breathe properly, apparently really drunk. But none of these were important anymore. After the man took off his coat, the young man felt the scent on the man's body fade. Wondering if he is a beta, the man scooped him up and threw him directly onto the bed. "I don't want to sleep with a mouse that's flying a plane. Look at this young guy. The man thinks he must be drunk. The young guy's differentiation came later than most people's. This is something he inherited from his mother. His mother told him, from the day you differentiate, you must start looking for your own alpha. The young guy doesn't understand, isn't love something you wait for? But his father shakes his head, only a high compatibility score can support love. At this moment, his mother next to him remains silent. The young guy doesn't understand, why does an omega have to find an alpha? Many betas adhere to non-marriage principles. His father tells him he will understand later. That day, the young guy went on a blind date. The match was introduced by his father's friend, an alpha. His appearance was just as his father described, someone suitable for marriage. After the blind date ended, the person leaned towards the young guy, your scent is really special. This action, however, made the young guy very disgusted. At that moment, the man directly took the young guy's phone, this is my number, you can call me anytime. At the same time, he affectionately called the young man's nickname. On the way back, he received a call from a friend asking about the results of his blind date. The young man straightforwardly explained the discomfort he felt during the process. Meanwhile, his susceptibility period had arrived, needing suppressants. Just as he was about to hang up, a car rushed over from the side. The next second, he lay in a pool of blood. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself in a strange world, yet he was completely unharmed. However, he urgently needed suppressants, and his ID couldn't be used to check into a hotel. He couldn't buy suppressants at the pharmacy either. At the moment he turned around, he met that man. After the man took a shower, he looked thoughtfully at the young man who was fast asleep on the bed, then went downstairs to his car. Recalling that the young man had told him his name, Shintingwei, the man thought for a while and then made a call to check on someone named Shintingwei. Then he dialed the phone to check on someone named Shintingwei. The young man slowly opened his eyes and saw strawberries all over his body in the mirror. In the middle of the night, Lianju returned home. As soon as he opened the door, he saw the nanny. The nanny told Lianju that Tong Tong's report card had not been signed yet. Since he refused, it was left unsigned. If Lianju hadn't come back, she would have signed it the next day. When signing, he noticed that Tong Tong's name did not have a surname in front of it. Lianju added it directly. The nanny was very happy to see this. Lianju told her he would take Tong Tong to register on Sunday. Tong Tong has been living here for 2 years. Previously, due to Lianju's age, he couldn't complete the adoption procedures. Now that he is finally 30 years old, Tong Tong can have a legal status. As the morning sun shone, the young man slowly opened his eyes, and the room became very quiet. He felt sore all over. Then he came to the mirror and found strawberries all over his body. At this moment, he touched his glands. Fortunately, that person was a bet. It would have been more troublesome if it were an alpha. Tong Tong was still groggy after waking up. At that moment, he was surprised to find Uncle Lian there. He was about to call him uncle, but he quickly realized he should call him dad. Just then, Lianju received a text message that Shintingwei had already checked out. He then made a call to have someone keep a close watch on him. Just as Shintingwei got into the car, the driver mentioned a route name he had never heard before. When the driver mentioned the city name, Shintingwei also found it very unfamiliar, having never heard of it before. Seeing his condition, the driver thought he was drunk and immediately kicked him out of the car. Still feeling unwell, he stumbled and was about to fall, looking around this unfamiliar place, not knowing where to go. At that moment, Lianju was in a meeting, but messages on his phone were distracting him, causing him to check and reply to his phone multiple times. The people nearby were stunned. After the meeting, colleagues thought the CEO was acting strangely today. They thought he was in love. Lianju learned from a call that Shintingwei fainted by the roadside. The person has been sent to the hospital. The doctor collected blood samples for testing, the results will be known later. Then, he focused on another issue. His subordinate informed him that they still hadn't found information on Shintingwei's identity. However, Lianju wasn't surprised. It would be unusual if it were easy to find out. So he told him to keep watching and report any news promptly. Then, he took Tong Tong back for a meal. Upon seeing the man inside, Lianju told Tong Tong to address him as Mr. Chen. His appearance was frightening, so Tong Tong bravely greeted him. Yet, Tong Tong wondered why he wasn't called Mr. Lien. When it was time to eat, because he couldn't use the knife and fork, the man got a bit angry. How can you be so grown up and still not know how to eat? The whole place fell silent immediately. Tong Tong lowered his head in grievance. Lianju, seeing him like this, instantly defended him. I've been quite busy lately and haven't had time to teach him. Then he handed him a tissue and considerately helped him cut the steak, placing it in front of him. Seeing Uncle Lian drinking wine, Tong Tong was curious. Does your red wine taste the same as my drink? This question reminded Lianju of Shin Tingwei again. At this moment, he was still in the hospital, dreaming about what had happened that night. Suddenly, Lianju snapped back to reality with a shout. The man asked him to talk in the study. As he put down his wineglass, he was still worried about Shin Tingwei's condition. Seeing the young man's flushed face, the man approached step by step. "Are you high or just drunk?" the man asked. Because Lianju went to discuss work, Tong Tong was sitting alone in the living room daydreaming. The little guy just wanted to go home. That's when Mrs. Chen came over and told Tong Tong not to call her /Madam/ because it sounded old. So Tong Tong called her /sister/ which made her happy. After hearing Tong Tong say the food was good here, Mrs. Chen said he could have the driver bring him over any time he wanted. Anyway, since his father was so busy, there's nothing to worry about. Chen Shulian had a bad temper, but like Lianju, he wasn't a bad person, despite what they said. However, in Tong Tong's view, Chen Shulian was not like his dad at all. Even though dad always wore a stern face, he wasn't scary at all. In fact, he was gentle. After finishing his work, Lianju took Tong Tong home and carefully carried him to bed, tucking him in. His gaze was very gentle. Then the phone rang. It was the assistant calling. He immediately rushed over. His assistant told him the person was on the second floor. The client's test results showed some elevated hormone levels, but the cause was unclear. Moreover, there were no traces of drugs. He also asked the assistant to confirm if Shin Tingwei had consumed alcohol, as his blood report showed an alcohol level of 0, indicating he hadn't drunk anything. Before Lianju arrived, the doctor had already administered In-4 to Shin Tingwei. If the fever still doesn't subside, he will need a detailed examination tomorrow. Lianju looked at Shin Tingwei in this state, then had his assistant leave and closed the door. He then turned to Shin Tingwei on the bed and said, "Stop pretending." At this moment, Shin Tingwei slowly opened his eyes, surprised to be discovered. Lianju picked up his ID and asked him if it was a work badge. Shin Tingwei looked confused. Lianju told him to get up once he was awake. Looking around, he clearly remembered being on the street before. It seemed he had been saved by him once again, so he politely thanked him. At this moment, Lianju noticed the hickeys he left on Shin Tingwei's body and his tattered clothes. After having someone change into new clothes and come out, Shin Tingwei looked at the clothes that had been prepared long ago and slowly began to undress. By this time, Lianju was already waiting in the living room. Then, hearing some movement, Lianju saw Shin Tingwei coming towards him in oversized clothes. Lianju signaled for him to sit there. At this moment, Shin Tingwei felt extremely uncomfortable. Just as he was about to say something, he was interrupted. Lianju asked him what he wanted. Shin Tingwei didn't understand what he meant. Lianju asked if he wanted money or a project. Shin Tingwei understood and told him it wasn't what he thought. Hearing Shin Tingwei's explanation, Lianju was curious about what he actually did. Seeing him not respond, he began to guess. "Did you take something and go out to find someone to play with on the street?" Shin Tingwei asked what the smell on his body was. Lianju looked puzzled and realized he was asking about the smell from that day. Lianju told him it was perfume, and then Shin Tingwei didn't react, not realizing it wasn't a bet. Lianju chuckled. "Are you here to revisit your childhood again? Every time this topic comes up, he always talks about himself like that." It seems his understanding of a bet is different from what he says. Thinking back to not being able to buy suppressants at the pharmacy and that the people he met these days had no pheromones on them, these strange events felt very unreal to him. Suddenly, Shin Tingwei's heat came again, constantly emitting the scent of an omega. Lianju wondered why there was a smell of alcohol on him. At this moment, Shin Tingwei said he was in heat. Lianju slowly approached him, then pinned him down. "Have you taken drugs or are you just drunk?" This was Shin Tingwei's condition. Shin Tingwei looks so disoriented that even Lianju can't tell if he's high or just drunk. Hearing him claim he's not high, just horny, it's shocking how innocently he can utter such explicit words. Lianju starts blushing, so after knowing Shin Tingwei's thoughts, Lianju doesn't say a word, just quietly watches him. At this moment, Shin Tingwei's face is completely red. He asks Lianju if he wants to see him get up to leave, then quickly pulls him back. Although Lianju's words embarrass him, Shin Tingwei shyly nods. Despite this, Lianju still shakes off his hand. An omega's heat period typically lasts 3 to 5 days. If not alleviated, it will definitely be accompanied by persistent fever. Only by being temporarily or permanently marked by an alpha can this torment be temporarily or completely relieved. Today is the second day, if lucky, only the last day remains. Lianju is morosely smoking alone when he hears a noise and turns to see it's Shin Tingwei. So, he was directly called over. Shin Tingwei obediently stepped forward. His already flushed cheeks turned even redder under the gaze. The next second, Lianju lifted his chin. Seeing him always looking so pitiful, as if he was being bullied, Lianju was almost furious. At that moment, some ash accidentally fell onto Shin Tingwei's collarbone. The burning sensation made him flinch. Lianju, already somewhat irritable, immediately extinguished the cigarette, then brushed the ash off Shin Tingwei. Seeing his teary eyes, Lianju was speechless. Why are you crying? There's no broken skin. Shin Tingwei was still running a fever at this time. The close proximity made him unable to resist. Being teased like this, even Lianju was starting to lose control. When Shin Tingwei opened his eyes again, Lianju had already given him a bath. Who would have thought you could fall asleep in the middle of a bath? Suddenly recalling the previous scenes, he hastily sits up. Seeing him clutching his stomach, Lianju tells him it's all cleaned up. Why so nervous? It's not like you can get pregnant. Shin Ting is unaware that Omega and Alpha can breed offspring. Ada's reproductive capacity is relatively suboptimal. But Lianju doesn't seem like a beta. Shin Ting is somewhat afraid. Could it really happen? Lianju asks what he's talking about. Surprised that he's still talking about pregnancy, I think you've gone delirious from the fever. Urges him to sleep quickly. With Lianju by his side, he indeed quickly feels sleepy. The next day, he hears the nanny knocking on the door. Shin Ting slowly gets up, and Lianju has already prepared clothes for him, which are quite expensive. As soon as he opens the door, the nanny takes out a thermometer to check his temperature. Then take a photo of the temperature and send it to Lianju because Lianju instructed to have his temperature measured before 8 o'clock. If he still feels unwell, he needs to go to the hospital. Shin Tingwei said he didn't feel any discomfort. So, while having a meal, he asked the nanny a lot of questions. As expected, this is not the world he used to live in, and there are only 2 genders here. He probably came here because of that car accident. Finally, will his friend who called him feel guilty because of this? Should the alpha who deliberately induced his estrus be held legally responsible? And his parents, who were proud of him, he wonders how they are doing now. At this moment, Lianju's assistant arrived to take Shin Tingwei home. Later, Lianju called the assistant and found out that the address Shin Tingwei gave is not in the city, and this place can't be found nationwide. Angry, Lianju immediately asked the assistant to send Shin Tingwei to a mental hospital. The assistant actually took him to a mental hospital. Lianju called and told Shin Tingwei to cooperate with the examination and not to play tricks. After that, the assistant carefully checked each test report. Because the boss felt there was an issue, he had to find the issue within a report that showed no issues, to save face. Shin Tingwei proposed that there might be a problem with the machine. The next second, he was met with the assistant's gaze. The hospitals use our company's equipment. There couldn't possibly be an issue. Seeing this, Shin Tingwei even doubted if their company culture was based on arrogance. Next, Shin Tingwei guessed that the assistant was about to take him back to the previous villa. Lianju told the assistant that Shin Tingwei could stay there until he remembered his own residence. After a day of running around and observing, Shin Tingwei roughly figured out that the currency here was not the same as the one he brought. And even if it was, it wouldn't last more than a week. For now, he could only trouble Lianju a bit longer. Lianju arrived at the airport. A beautiful woman was waving at him. Weren't you supposed to come back tomorrow? Have you told Dad? The beautiful woman told him she hadn't yet. She was planning to surprise them. Her friend, infatuated, was staring at Lianju, then nudged the beautiful woman, Ning Shui, asking, "Aren't you going to introduce him?" After introducing her friend to Lianju, Ning Shui hurriedly walked up and linked her arm through his. "This is my childhood betrothed," she said, causing her friend's pupils to shake. Thinking the joke went too far, Lianju allowed Ning Shui to tell her friends the truth. "He's my brother." Through the car window, Ning Shui recognized Tong Tong at a glance. He looked nothing like the pictures Lianju had sent previously. Lianju told him that he had gained weight and had been a bit malnourished before. He asked Ning Shui if she wanted to go home. Hearing that woman was still at her house, and that the old man hadn't left her yet, quite devoted, aren't they? At that moment, Tong Tong realized. She was talking about the beautiful aunt they had met that day, wanting to eat Chinese food. They had lunch together with Lianju and Tong Tong. Since that woman was at home, Ning Shui really didn't want to go back and thought about Lianju's house in the suburbs, considering staying there. When Lianju told him it was inconvenient because he had friends over, Ning Shui immediately sensed something was up and guessed it was a girlfriend. But Lianju said no, so Ning Shui started teasing him. "You're so busy you're practically becoming a monk." Over at the villa, Shin Ting realizes it's already late when he wakes up. He had fallen asleep in the living room at some point and figured no one would come over tonight. Just then, his stomach growled. He opened the fridge to find it packed with food, each item more expensive than the last. So he chose the cheaper option, quick frozen dumplings, which were also easy to make. Seeing the table made him recall his times with Lianju, instantly blushing at the thought. Wondering when he could see him again, he knew staying here wasn't a solution. Xinting decided to leave and start a new life. A few days later, he heard someone at the villa. Xintingwei, unexcited, went downstairs to check and found that it was Lianju's assistant. Feeling somewhat disappointed instantly, the assistant saw the untouched ingredients in the fridge and wondered what he had been eating these days. Xintingwei told him it was frozen dumplings and glutinous rice balls, making the assistant think he couldn't cook. Then, the assistant gave him his business card, telling him to call him if he needed anything and that he would send a housekeeper over later. After pondering for a moment, Xintingwei hoped the assistant would let him talk to Lianju on the phone. Xinting hoped his assistant could put him through to Lianju on the phone, but the assistant told him that Lian was currently abroad and that he could relay any messages. So, Xinting asked the assistant to help him obtain an ID card because he wanted to leave. At the party, Lianju was smoking alone, looking gloomy, when suddenly his phone rang. It was his assistant calling to inform him of Xinting's request, instructing the assistant to proceed as requested. Then, he went downstairs to join the party. At that moment, a man with a female companion approached, exchanging pleasantries that were only superficial. In reality, the man was hoping Lianju would cede some projects to him. Seeing Lianju not giving in, the man quickly signaled his companion. Hence, the woman picked up a wine glass to toast Lianju. However, she was also attracted to Lianju's handsome appearance and began to accidentally spill her wine on his clothes. The man quickly played along, suggesting his companion apologize to him. At this time, Lianju took off his coat and directly refused the cleaning fee for the clothes on the grounds that he had something to do, asking them to contact his assistant. The two were stunned. Such a trick was nothing in front of Lianju, not even close to Xintingwei. Over here, Xintingwei received his ID card. Earlier, an assistant had called someone to come to the house to take photos of him. They also prepared information relevant to dealing with the household registry investigators who would be visiting. Then, they handed him an envelope. By the way, this is also from Mr. Lian. When he opened it, it turned out to be money, but Xintingwei only took one bill. Seeing his insistence, the assistant didn't say much more and asked if he wanted to speak to Mr. Lian. But at this moment, Xintingwei had nothing more to say and hoped the assistant would convey his thanks. Then he walked out of the villa, holding the recruitment information he had looked up on the computer in the guest room earlier. He could only go for interviews one by one. At this time, Tongtong was playing at the amusement park with Ning Shui. Suddenly, Ning Shui noticed that the necklace on her neck was missing. Xintingwei just came to take over the shift. Seeing his colleague looking for something, he stepped forward to ask and learned that a customer's necklace was lost here. So, he hurriedly approached and assured that he would definitely help her find it back. At this moment, Ning Shui received a phone call. It was Lianju coming here to pick them up for a meal. Ning Shui didn't want to trouble them, saying it was really okay. It was also because of my own carelessness that it was lost. You guys should be off work, right? No need to look for it, go have your meal. The colleague hurriedly found Xintingwei, telling him the customer said there's no need to look for it. Just as Xintingwei stood up, he felt a bit dizzy. He still felt that he should leave the customer's contact information, shaking his head, saying he would return it once found. His searching action was just seen by Lianju nearby. Ning Shui wondered what he was looking at. Lianju quickly changed the subject, asking what they were just doing when leaving. Still not forgetting to look back at Xintingwei, Mega suspected she was pregnant. Went to the pharmacy to buy a pregnancy test but was scolded by the clerk as a scumbag, searched for a long time but still couldn't find the necklace. A female colleague kindly handed Xintingwei a drink, apologizing for delaying his off-duty time, but Xintingwei didn't blame her at all, only the last spot left, suggesting to flip over the sponge pad to look. At this moment, noticed something shining over there, hurriedly went over to search if this was it. The colleague was very happy, actually found it, but accidentally lost his balance and fell down. Also knocked down Xintingwei, seeing him not getting up for a long time, thought he was joking, then noticed he seemed to have fainted. Hurriedly went over to shake him, and saw him slowly opening his eyes before sighing in relief, concerned about where he felt uncomfortable. But Xintingwei asked him to contact the customer first, learned that the customer would arrive around 9 p.m. Xintingwei decided to deliver it later since the colleague lives far away, making it inconvenient to come over. Despite the colleague wanting to treat him to barbecue to thank him, Xintingwei still declined, using the excuse of having something to do. The colleague probably knew he was financially struggling, but never mentioned it, wanting to help him but unable to do much. Xintingwei took out the only money he had in his pocket, and walked into a pharmacy. Because electronic tests are more expensive than test strips, he reluctantly bought the strips. The clerk thought he was buying for his girlfriend and couldn't help but call him a scumbag for being so stingy. Xintingwei just pretended not to hear. His roommates were having a late-night snack and saw him just returning. enthusiastically telling him they saved some for him and to come out and eat after changing clothes. Shin Tingwei felt very fortunate to have this job. The boss initially hired him because of his affability. She thought he was really good at dealing with children. Looking at the pregnancy test on the table, could she really be pregnant? When she came out, her roommates had already gone back to their rooms and she hadn't had a chance to thank them. Looking at the midnight snack they had specially left for her, Shin Tingwei didn't want to waste their kindness. She took just one bite and immediately felt like vomiting, but she still forced herself to finish it. She then remembered the times when she used to eat with her parents. Now she was the only one left, and sadness surged through her heart. But she had to hurry and finish eating, as she needed to return the necklace later. At the amusement park, seeing a child nearby, Shin Tingwei happily greeted him. At this moment, Ning Shui arrived too. The necklace was finally returned, and this scene was seen by Lian Ju in the car. Learning that the necklace was found, and it was Shin Tingwei who helped to find it, she blamed herself for being rash and always causing trouble for others. Meanwhile, her gaze drifted outside to Shin Tingwei. Having not seen him for over a month, his hair had grown longer than before. She teased him for still looking as frail as ever. Seeing Shin Tingwei living so poorly now, she impulsively recharged his amusement park's membership card with 500,000. Shin Tingwei looked at the pregnancy test in his hand. Indeed, he was pregnant. Tears instantly welled up in his eyes. He tried hard not to cry. His roommate, hearing the noise outside the door, thought he was feeling unwell. Shin Tingwei told him it was nothing. A while later, when he saw people coming out, the roommate quickly went up to care for him, thinking he was unwell and prepared to ask for leave on his behalf. Shin Tingwei hesitated for a while but still asked his roommate to lend him some money, feeling very embarrassed. Then he went to the gynecology department of the hospital. The doctor wondered why the pregnant person did not come themselves, and Shin Tingwei made up a random excuse to brush it off. Then consult the doctor about medical abortion. After hearing the doctor's explanation, Shin Tingwei was worried about the pain but still wanted to know about the follow-up preparations. At this moment, a pregnant woman nearby heard their conversation. She began to mock Shin Tingwei right in front of him, and Shin Tingwei could only suffer in silence. Then, everything the doctor mentioned was about female pregnant patients, leaving the doctor puzzled about Shin Tingwei's questions. Shin Tingwei knew it was futile to continue and walked anxiously along the corridor. At that moment, Lian Ju happened to pass by and recognized Shin Tingwei, but the latter did not see him. Puzzled as to why he was there, remembering their times together always brought him to tears. He felt angry when thinking about how Shin Tingwei seemed to forget about others so easily and then went to the doctor to pick up Yuman's pregnancy test report. Called Ning Shui on the road, Lian Ju told him the results were already out. From now on, be careful what you say at home. From now on, be cautious when speaking at home. On the way back to the Chen family, I saw Shin Tingwei again. After being hit, he just silently endured it. This person really has such a weak personality that he doesn't even argue when he suffers a loss. He just sheds silent tears. Originally, Lian Ju thought that Shin Tingwei would find an excuse to come back, but in the end, he disappeared completely from his sight just as he had hoped. If it weren't for meeting again at the amusement park that day, he would have almost forgotten about this person. It seems that he really might have been drugged back then. Moreover, he only took one piece of the money given to him. Now he's in such a miserable state. Finding out that the driver's daughter had worked summer jobs at the amusement park, and that staff would get a commission if they signed up members, Lian Ju had an idea. In the evening, the roommate came back from work and knocked on Shin Tingwei's door. The roommates couldn't wait to share the good news with him. Brother Shin, the customer you served yesterday, the child named Tongtong, right? Today they specifically signed up for a membership card because of your good service. So how much do you think they topped up? Seeing him guessing only 1,000, his roommate shook his head and then gestured the number to him. Shin Tingwei thought it was 5,000. Feeling that he had only done his duty, he was embarrassed to let the customer spend so much, but he was still told it was not right. His roommate said it was 500,000. Shin Tingwei was so shocked that his eyes widened. Hearing from Shin Tingwei that he was pregnant made him almost curse in anger. On the other side, Ning Shui received a call from Shin Tingwei, who said someone had used Tongtong's name to get a membership card at his workplace. Ning Shui was puzzled, thinking it must be Tongtong having fun and pestering Lian Ju to get it. Just then, a servant knocked on the door to hurry her downstairs for dinner, and she had to hang up the phone hurriedly. Still, she didn't get the information about the membership card. After going downstairs, Ning Shui cursed in front of everyone. Seeing this, Father Chen immediately scolded her, and Yuman quickly spoke up for Ning Shui. Ning Shui got angry when she saw the two of them acting like that. This is the bird's nest that Mr. Chen took from the servant. He told Yuman that it was specially prepared for her, and that she should nourish herself more since she was pregnant. Then he asked Lian Ju if he had any suggestions for the child's name. Lian Ju suggested the name Qinhua, which Mr. Chen was very pleased with, and Yuman also liked it. But thinking that if it was a daughter, she couldn't possibly be called Little Joie, so they started discussing whether they hoped for a boy or a girl. Yuman took the opportunity to strike up a conversation with Ning Shui, who directly responded with a scowl, saying it didn't matter to her as she wasn't the one giving birth. Thus, Mr. Chen didn't sit idle either and began hinting at Lian Ju when discussing the child. Seeing that he didn't catch the hint, Mr. Chen went all out and asked him if he was still seeing the doctor lately. Lian Ju glared at him upon hearing this. When Ning Shui learned that he was seeing a doctor, she quickly showed concern and asked what was wrong. Lian Ju told her it was nothing serious, just that he hadn't been resting well for a few years and had seen a doctor for treatment. Mr. Chen, relentless as ever, said that since there was nothing wrong, they should start planning for their own child, as an adopted child is never quite the same as one's own. Ning Shui couldn't listen any longer and angrily pounded the table. Can we eat or not? Have your own child. How old is my brother? He doesn't even have a girlfriend yet. What are you talking about having kids for? Unable to bear the conversation any longer, Lian Ju left immediately. He quickly said he was done eating and walked out. Shin Tingwei went to an internet cafe to look up information on abortion. Seeing the dangers and the cost of the procedure, he was taken aback and felt extremely helpless. That night, he returned to his dorm, lay on his bed, and recalled what the doctor had said. He touched his stomach, thinking that soon it would start to swell. More than the surgery, he feared being seen as a freak at the hospital. Afraid he might not overcome his fear, he decided to keep the child. In a world where he couldn't even see his own future, how could he possibly support a child? The next day, his roommate knocked on his door, asking if he needed him to call in sick again. Shin Tingwei told him he was fine and asked to borrow his phone, then called Lian Ju's assistant. At this moment, the only person I could think of was Lian Ju. After all, he is the child's father. Besides, his company deals with medical equipment. He has money and connections. Solving the child's problem through him was the safest way. In the company, Lian Ju watched his employees argue endlessly over the plan. He felt like his head was about to explode. When he saw the call, he immediately went outside. He thought the assistant had something else. When the assistant said Shin Tingwei was looking for him, he thought it was about that day's membership card issue being discovered. He asked the assistant to transfer the call. Those two inside were still arguing, which was annoying to watch. Just then, the call connected. Lian Ju hurriedly said if it was because of that card, but before he could finish, he heard Shin Tingwei say she was pregnant. Lian Ju was first shocked, then wanted to curse. Shin Tingwei, do you think I'm a 3-year-old kid? When Shin Tingwei asked if his company had abortion equipment, Lian Ju was speechless. Are you fucking crazy? Since learning about Shin Tingwei's pregnancy, Lian Ju felt like his IQ had been assimilated by her. After being scolded and hung up on by Lian Ju, Shin Tingwei was not surprised, it was just as he had expected. After hanging up the phone, Lian Ju was very angry, while those two guys in the office were still arguing. So, Lian Ju forcefully opened the door, which even scared the director silly. Lian Ju, with a stern face, demanded the director to bring him the inspection report of the hospital equipment supplied by the company before the end of work. Just as he was about to catch his breath, he heard a message on his phone. It turned out that Ning Shui was complaining about that woman again. Because of this, Lian Ju had comforted her many times. This relationship really made him feel helpless. As expected, the director delivered the equipment inspection report before leaving work. After reviewing and finding no issues, he recalled the day he encountered her at the hospital. Maybe it was not a coincidence at all. He wondered if Shin Tingwei had somehow known he would return and had thus pretended to be pitifully waiting there. The more Lian Ju thought about it, the angrier he got, feeling that Shin Tingwei had played him over and over again. At this point, he receives another message from Chun Shulian, asking him to come back for dinner. The Chun household is very lively tonight. Lian Ju immediately notices Ning Shui, who is sulking in a corner. Hearing Lian Ju calling her, Ning Shui quickly thinks of running away, but she is still called back by Lian Ju. Seeing Ning Shui's appearance today is quite abnormal. At this moment, Chen Shulian signals everyone to look his way, not only to announce the addition of a new member to the Chun family, but also about Ning Shui's marriage, the partner being Lian Ju. Chen Shulian tells everyone he plans to settle this matter next month. Everyone comes forward to congratulate them. Hearing her father asking for her opinion, Ning Shui blushes and says anything is fine. Then she sneaks a glance at Lian Ju behind her, while everyone is toasting. Lian Ju tells everyone that Ning Shui is just his sister. As soon as this statement is made, the whole room goes silent instantly. Chen Shulian already knew he would say that, so he told Lian Ju that he and Ning Shui had different surnames. This is called childhood sweethearts. The man next to him also echoed. Listening to their conversation, Lian Ju felt a heavy heart. The Chen family's kindness in raising him was like a mountain, pressing on him so he couldn't breathe. After being adopted by the Chen family, not only did they support his education, they also entrusted one of their most important businesses to him. Lian Zhu knew very well that if it weren't for Chen Shulian, he wouldn't have come this far. Therefore, he could not deny Chen Shulian's kindness to him. When he left, Ning Shui silently followed behind. But at this moment, Lian Zhu didn't want to bother with her and drove off immediately. At this point, Tong Tong was still at home playing with building blocks. Suddenly hearing that Dad was back, he was startled and quickly got up to admit his mistake. The nanny quickly spoke up for Tong Tong, saying that since tomorrow was the weekend, she let him play a little longer because he wanted to. Lian Zhu did not show any anger, but Tong Tong was so scared that she cried and apologized to him, which made Lian Zhu look cold. He told her that he wasn't angry, and as he looked at her toys, he wondered if she was too lonely by herself. Suddenly, he thought of Shin Tingwei's pregnancy. Then he immediately snapped back to reality, wondering why he would think that way. Had his intelligence been assimilated by that person? That day, Shin Tingwei was working at the amusement park. Suddenly, he heard someone was looking for him. After confirming Shin Tingwei's pregnancy, Lian Zhu didn't hesitate to take her to get married. Shin Tingwei was still at work when a colleague suddenly came to tell him someone was looking for him. It was a handsome man. He was wondering who it could be when he suddenly saw that familiar face. It was Lian Zhu. Shin Tingwei was somewhat at a loss, not knowing why he had come. Could it be because he believed in the matter about the child? Lian Zhu quietly watched him, feeling like he seemed thinner than before. The work uniform looked baggy on him. Just as Shin Tingwei was about to speak, Lian Zhu chuckled and then mocked him for performing while pregnant. Even so, Shin Tingwei didn't argue back. He just stood there, head down, touching his belly. Seeing Lian Zhu smoking, Shin Tingwei quickly turned his head, wanting to say something but hesitated. Lian Zhu thought he wanted to smoke too and tossed him a cigarette, causing a bit of a scramble. After catching it, Shin Tingwei told him he didn't want to smoke and that he couldn't anyway. Lian Zhu, not wanting to waste words, directly asked him if he was pregnant. Shin Tingwei answered yes. Hearing this, Lian Zhu wondered if the child was his. Shin Tingwei hurriedly explained that he hadn't been with anyone else. At this point, Lian Zhu asked him to lift his shirt. Despite feeling a bit embarrassed, Shin Tingwei did as he was told, explaining that it had only been a little over a month, so it didn't show yet. At that moment, Lian Zhu directly approached and pressed close, blushing Shin Tingwei's face instantly when he touched his stomach. The next second, Shin Tingwei quickly dodged away. Lian Zhu didn't say much else, just told him to pack up and follow him. Shin Tingwei wondered where they were going. Lian Zhu looked at him seriously. Aren't you carrying my child? Alright, let's get married. Shin Tingwei could hardly believe it. Could the child really be kept this way? Lian Zhu agreed and told him that he would give him anything he wanted. So, Shin Tingwei agreed. At this moment, he had no energy to speculate on his intentions. Even if there was a glimmer of hope, he would not choose to abort the child. Now, marrying Lian Zhu was that glimmer of hope, even if it might just be a loveless marriage. Then he brought Lian Zhu to his dormitory, showing him the kind of place Shin Tingwei lived in on a daily basis. Lian Zhu's face turned sour on the spot. As he was tidying up, Lian Zhu looked around. He noticed a book about law on the table and asked if he wanted to be a lawyer. Shin Tingwei didn't respond. Thinking back to the previous world, he remembered he majored in law during his undergraduate studies. After coming to this world, he rented some law books from a bookstore, but realized that the rules from before didn't fully apply here. Seeing that he didn't answer, Lian Zhu didn't ask further. While tidying up, Shin Tingwei saw the box of pregnancy tests. He still wanted to tell Lian Zhu that he hadn't gone for an official checkup and only used 5 home tests, all of which were positive. Although it wasn't confirmed by a formal test, the symptoms during this period matched early pregnancy. At this moment, Lian Zhu asked him if he didn't go to the hospital that afternoon. Shin Tingwei was very surprised. He quickly explained that because it was the obstetrics and gynecology department, men couldn't register. He was also afraid to get a blood test because it might reveal something troublesome. Lian Zhu was getting angry, thinking if this person still hadn't had enough of acting. Suddenly, Shin Tingwei moved closer and asked Lian Zhu if he could help him find a doctor to check. If they stayed this close for another second, Lian Zhu feared he wouldn't be able to control himself. He told him they'd talk about it later. Shin Tingwei couldn't say anything more and went back to the villa with Lian Zhu. The assistant had already prepared the documents. Surprisingly, it was an application form for going abroad. After signing, the assistant told Shin Tingwei that they also needed the original ID card and household registration book. Shin Tingwei was puzzled about why they needed to go abroad. Hearing this question, the assistant was confused. Aren't you and President Lian registering for marriage? Knowing that the 500,000 membership card was arranged by Lian Zhu, the assistant was shocked. What a classic domineering CEO move. The assistant told Shin Tingwei that President Lian was going to take him to Country C for marriage registration. Shin Tingwei was puzzled. Can't we do it domestically? Lian Ju was speechless towards him. He told the assistant to make an appointment for the day after tomorrow. At this moment, Shin Tingwei immediately interrupted in a panic. No, I have to work the day after tomorrow. Lian Ju started mocking him again for being so eager to sell his art. Being constantly mocked like this, Shin Tingwei felt deeply aggrieved and was just about to say something. But seeing Lian Jue's expression still scared him, so he told Lian Jue that he hadn't received his salary yet. Lian Jue asked him to quit, but he refused because the former manager had told him that he had to work for a month before getting paid. Besides, there was a high-value membership card in front of him. At this moment, he suddenly remembered what Lian Jue said on the phone earlier. So he asked him if the 500,000 membership card was handled by him. The assistant was shocked when he heard this. This is such a classic domineering CEO move. It's the first time seeing Lian Jue looking flustered like this. Shin Ting couldn't help but laugh. Hearing that he wanted to quit after getting paid, Lian Jue didn't say much. The next day, Shin Ting slept until he woke up naturally. He hadn't slept so soundly in a long time. Lian Jue brought in many things. From a phone to clothes, everything he needed. Standing in front of the mirror changing clothes, he realized he had lost a lot of weight. Even though this is the size I always wear, it still feels loose on me. I wonder if it's because of malnutrition. Could this affect the baby's development? After going downstairs, I surprisingly met an auntie. The auntie told me she would take care of my diet and daily life from now on. As mealtime was approaching, she asked me to help call Mr. Lian down for dinner. So, Shin Ting came to the door of Lian Ju's room, hesitated for a moment, and was just about to knock. Hesitating for a moment just as he was about to knock, Lian Ju suddenly opens the door, startling Shin Tingwei. He stumbles backward, and Lian Ju quickly steps forward to catch him. The closeness makes him unconsciously blush. Lian Ju asks what's wrong, and Shin Tingwei instinctively tries to push him away. But the next second, he immediately withdraws his hand and tells him it's time for dinner. Lian Ju simply answers and heads downstairs. Shin Tingwei remains frozen, recalling the touch. Halfway there, Lian Ju finds his tie in a dead knot, so he directly calls Shin Tingwei over, asking if he can untie it. Shin Tingwei immediately starts to help. Seeing it's not getting untied quickly, Lian Ju starts to get impatient. Shin Tingwei tells him it'll be just a moment. Seeing him so close, Lian Ju can't help but swallow. She shyly turned her face away, but still couldn't help wanting to look at him. Apart from anything else, Shin Tingwei's appearance really fit his aesthetic. Otherwise, when he first saw him, he wouldn't have meddled. But thinking that he might be lying to him made him angry. Suddenly, he met his gaze. Shin Tingwei nervously helped him tie it. Although it was a bit crooked, they then went downstairs to eat together. Looking at the steak, Shin Tingwei thought it had a heavy greasy smell, but ate it for the nutrition. However, the next second he began to gag and quickly ran to the bathroom. Hearing Shin Tingwei vomit, the aunt quickly asked if the breakfast didn't agree with him. Finding out Shin Tingwei was unwell, the aunt prepared a cup of hot milk to warm his stomach. When Shin Tingwei returned to the dining table, he found Lian Ju was not there. The aunt told him Mr. Lian had gone upstairs after eating. While he was drinking milk, Lian Ju had already dressed and was ready to go out. Shin Tingwei quickly followed and called out, "Mr. Lian, wait a moment." Lian Ju turned around and indicated for him to speak up. Shin Tingwei, like a little child, didn't dare to speak too loudly, telling Lian Ju he didn't know how to get to work. Seeing his demeanor, Lian Ju was speechless, telling him he only had 5 minutes. Afterwards, he would have to figure out how to get to work by himself. So, Shin Tingwei hurried upstairs to change his clothes and felt extremely uneasy sitting in the car with Lian Ju. Shin Tingwei quietly shifted in his seat to increase the distance between them, looking at Lian Ju beside him, wondering if this might delay his getting to work. Shin Tingwei had just finished explaining the reason for his injured leg when Lian Ju gave him a look that said, "You're an idiot." When the colleague saw that Shin Tingwei was at work, she quickly came over to ask about his situation, and Shin Tingwei hurriedly avoided her gaze. The colleague asked if that person was here to cause trouble, as she had heard from another girl that it was a man looking for him, who seemed quite intimidating, assuming he was there to collect a debt. After sending off the last group of guests, Shin Tingwei sat on the bench, rolled up his trousers, and examined his injury. His colleague was surprised at how severe it was. Shin Tingwei told him he just stumbled on the netting. Thinking it was no big deal, he wondered how he should get home tonight, and whether to stay in the dormitory for a night. Just then, a car stopped in front of them. The driver, a man named Lian Ju, got out and greeted Shin Tingwei. His colleagues were stunned by the sight. "So, you're here to experience life, huh?" Shin Tingwei said helplessly, "Who experiences life like this?" His colleague wouldn't listen to his explanation and left, lost in their own imagined tales of family feuds. Thinking that Lian Zhu coming to pick him up might cause a delay, Shen Tingwei felt embarrassed. But when he opened the car door and saw that it was empty, the driver told him that Mr. Lian was still busy with work and couldn't come himself, so he sent him instead. Shen Tingwei's face turned red, and he quickly said that wasn't what he meant. After returning to the villa, I bathed comfortably. Noticing that the injury on my leg seemed more swollen than before, I decided to go downstairs to look for a first aid kit so as not to affect work tomorrow. But after a thorough search, it was empty. At that moment, I heard the door open. It was Lian Zhu coming home from work, followed by his assistant. There I was, exposed in front of both of them. Lian Zhu's gaze was instantly drawn to me. I was startled for a moment before I snapped back to reality. I quickly turned around to cover myself. That's when Lian Zhu stretched his hand to block the door, allowing his assistant to leave first. Once inside, while sneaking glances at Lian Zhu, I wondered whether to go back to my room or greet him. Lian Zhu sat down and loosened his tie. He asked what I was looking for. Seeing Lian Zhu appearing somewhat uncomfortable, I quickly offered him water. Upon hearing his request for warm water, Shen Tingwei immediately went to pour it and could smell the strong scent of alcohol on him. Lian Zhu continued with the previous question, finding out that Shen Tingwei was looking for the medicine box. Lian Zhu wondered what was wrong, and Shen Tingwei told him he had bumped his leg. Lian Zhu instinctively asked what happened. Suddenly realizing why he would ask that, Shen Tingwei was also surprised, thinking he must have asked because he was drunk. Hearing that Shen Tingwei had accidentally tripped and hit a step, Lian Zhu immediately looked at Shen Tingwei as if he was an idiot. Just as Shen Tingwei thought, Lian Zhu found it to be silly. Lian Zhu told him the medicine box was upstairs, and Shen Tingwei quickly said no need, planning to return to his room. At this point, Lian Zhu commanded him to come over, leading him to the door of Lian Zhu's room. Shen Tingwei didn't plan to go inside and wanted to trouble Lian Zhu to bring it out for him, but Lian Zhu said he was going to take a bath. He told him where the medicine was and let him fetch it himself, then closed the bathroom door. Shen Tingwei breathed a sigh of relief and began to look around Lian Zhu's room. Seeing the almost abandoned garden outside the window, he felt it was a pity. He then found the medicine chest as Lian Zhu had said. He hesitated at the bathroom door, wondering whether to say something before leaving. At that moment, the bathroom door suddenly opened. Lian Zhu stood right in front of him, making Shen Tingwei's heart race wildly. He told Lian Zhu that he had already gotten the medicine and hurriedly prepared to leave, but Lian Zhu grabbed him. Seeing Shen Tingwei like this, Lian Zhu felt his soul being captivated, so he pulled Shen Tingwei and wouldn't let him go. Shen Tingwei shyly turned his head and saw Lian Zhu looking like he had quite a bit to drink tonight. But at that moment, Lian Zhu was staring at him and then took the medicine from his hand, telling him it was expired. Shen Tingwei felt it was okay and wanted to make do with it, but of course, you can't use expired medicine. Shen Tingwei felt aggrieved but didn't dare to say much, only able to take the pack of cotton swabs and go back to his room to sleep. After returning to his room, his leg still hurt a lot, so he tried not to touch it. Praying that it would be better tomorrow and not affect his work, in the middle of the night, Lian Zhu brought some medicine and knocked on Shen Tingwei's door. Was it half an hour ago? Lian Zhu made a call to his assistant asking him to buy medicine. This assistant really deserves an extra bonus. After getting no response from knocking, Lian Zhu went straight in, surprised at how low his guard was, not even locking his door. Lian Zhu somewhat impatiently called him to wake up and apply the medicine, but the person is already asleep. Lian Zhu felt like he was going crazy, actually delivering medicine to him late at night. Bringing him medicine late at night. I originally planned to just leave it on his desk and walk away. Then I heard Shen Tingwei making noises in his sleep, and he was wrapped up so tightly. Even Lian Zhu was speechless. He went up to pull the quilt off him, and suddenly smelled a sweet, wine-like aroma. After pulling back the quilt, the smell seemed like cherries and cranberries. Seeing Shen Tingwei sleeping like that, Lian Zhu couldn't stay calm anymore. Are you deliberately seducing me? Fine, I'm not exactly a gentleman anyway, he said, and reached out. At that moment, Shen Tingwei suddenly woke up. Lian Zhu teased, why aren't you pretending to sleep anymore? Shen Tingwei blushingly told him, I'm not. But Lian Zhu didn't believe it. He felt that Shen Tingwei started seducing him the moment he entered the room. Shen Tingwei quickly got up and pushed him away, but was counteracted by him pinching his chin, saying, I'm drunk, so what? Shen Tingwei's strength was no match for Lian Zhu, he could only shyly avert his eyes. But Lian Zhu didn't plan to let him go. You weren't like this before. You've forgotten everything in just a month? Shen Tingwei was somewhat at a loss. Mr. Lian, your room is next door. Hearing this, Lian Zhu became displeased. Where I sleep and when do you get to arrange that? Or are you already considering yourself the master of this house? Shen Tingwei felt wronged and was just about to explain when Lian Zhu came up and gave him a kiss. Suddenly, Shen Tingwei felt a stomachache. Lian Zhu, seeing he wasn't faking it, called for a doctor. Observing the marks on Shin Tingwei's body, the doctor almost couldn't focus. The doctor asked Shin Tingwei if he could lift his clothes to check his belly. Shin Tingwei obediently complied. Lin Jie started complaining at the entrance, saying that the doctor needed to lift his clothes just to see his stomach. The doctor was startled and quickly explained that it was necessary. Lin Jie only found it troublesome. He didn't think he had used much force. Shin Tingwei briefly described the pain to the doctor. Lin Jie directly interrupted, telling the doctor that it wasn't severe. After speaking, he immediately felt guilty. Shin Tingwei worriedly asked the doctor, "Could I be having a miscarriage?" After knowing that Shin Tingwei was indeed pregnant, Lin Jie looked at him with a gentler expression. Hearing Shin Tingwei ask if it could be a miscarriage, the doctor was stunned, unable to believe his ears. Lin Jie immediately got angry and started yelling at him, saying that Shin Tingwei should differentiate the timing even when he's ill. This scared everyone on the spot into silence. Even though it was expected that Lin Jie would react this way, with the doctor right there, they had no choice but to push through and keep talking. So, Shin Tingwei immediately got up and told the doctor that he should be more than 1 month pregnant. In the early stages of pregnancy, he had used a small amount of anti-anxiety medication, had an irregular diet, and even engaged in several instances of excessive intense exercise, even experiencing a severe brief loss of consciousness. The abdominal pain started yesterday, and he had never experienced it before, so he was worried about the possibility of a miscarriage. After he earnestly finished speaking, the room fell silent. The doctor asked what President Lian meant, noting how convincingly Shin Tingwei spoke. Lian Zhu then asked the doctor to give him a thorough checkup. After the examination, the doctor told Lian Zhu that he needed to take a blood sample back to the hospital for testing. It was also the first time he heard a man claim to be pregnant, and he asked Lian Zhu if he should take Mr. Shin to see a psychiatrist. Because he had previously seen the test reports of the psychiatric hospital's equipment, Lian Zhu knew that Shin Tingwei did not have a mental issue. So, he asked the doctor if there were any factors that could cause a person to emit some unusual scents, like fragrance or alcohol scent. The doctor became interested when he mentioned this. He informed Lian Zhu that it was hormones, but it was the first time he heard of the alcohol scent. Although he did not want to seem too obvious, Lian Zhu still asked the doctor to check Shin Tingwei's lower leg before leaving. "Let's check if there's any bone damage." The doctor was very touched after hearing this. It seems that Mr. Lian has a sharp tongue but a soft heart. The next day, when he received the doctor's call, Lian Zhu could hardly believe it. "Are you sure there's no problem with the test results?" The doctor hoped that Lian Zhu would bring Shin Tingwei to the hospital for a more comprehensive examination. After hanging up the phone, Lian Zhu immediately went over and grabbed Shin Tingwei's hand. "Come with me to the hospital." After the checkup, Shin Tingwei could hear Lian Zhu inside talking to the doctor about the situation. Hearing the doctor's words, Shin Tingwei also became a bit worried. At this time, the assistant brought Shin Tingwei's salary from the amusement park and informed him that the resignation procedures had been completed. Seeing Shin Tingwei so downcast, the assistant sat down and told him, "Mr. Lian is mainly concerned about your health. He specifically asked me to bring over some bruise medicine after learning about your injury last night." The board meeting originally scheduled for this morning was also postponed because of the hospital visit. "It's clear that Mr. Lian values you very much. I hope Mr. Shin won't blame Mr. Lian for acting on his own." Shin Tingwei was fully aware of everything and saw Lian Zhu coming out. The assistant hurried forward to tell him that the contract and plane tickets were ready, and the flight was tonight. After all arrangements were made, Lian Zhu glanced at Shin Tingwei beside him, then reached out his hand and said, "Let's go." Hearing Lian Zhu speak so gently to him, Shin Tingwei was surprised and his eyes widened. After getting into the car, Lian Zhu also thoughtfully reminded him to fasten his seatbelt. Shin Tingwei obediently complied, and the next second Lian Zhu asked something shocking, "Are you transgender?" which completely baffled Shin Tingwei. Telling Lian Zhu he was not, Lian Zhu quickly stopped the car, intending to clarify things properly. Shin Tingwei said it was because he refused to take precautions, which embarrassed Lian Zhu, who thought Shin Tingwei knew he would get pregnant, so he deliberately approached him. Shin Tingwei quickly denied it, telling him he was feeling unwell that day. Even if it wasn't him, it might have been someone else. He intended to treat it as an accident, but ended up being taken back by his assistant. Seeing the children outside, Shin Tingwei asked Lian Zhu whether he would agree to let the children stay. Hearing Lian Zhu's response, Shin Tingwei felt somewhat disappointed. He told him that he married him just to be able to have the children. He asked what he needed to do. Lian Zhu indifferently replied that he only needed a marriage. Some occasions later required his presence, and to cooperate with the doctor as much as possible. Shin Tingwei agreed to each point, then Lian Zhu told him that they would fly to Country C tonight to register their marriage. In the evening, they boarded the plane. That was too fast, even the priest hadn't finished speaking. Lianju abruptly interrupted, and the two arrived at the airport in Country C, where heavy snow was falling. Shen Tingwei wondered if they were going to register directly, but Lianju ignored him. The situation was quite awkward. Shen Tingwei had to find another topic to ease the atmosphere, but Lianju still didn't glance at him. So, Lianju took off his own scarf and directly placed it around Shen Tingwei's neck. He directly put it on Shen Tingwei's neck, clearly still cherishing his little Tingwei. Shen Tingwei stood there dumbfounded, his face unconsciously blushing, when the car arrived. After getting in the car, the driver told them that the gowns were ready. The snow scene outside the window caught Shen Tingwei's attention. It's been a long time since I've seen snow. Inside the hall, the priest was reciting the wedding vows. Lianju directly answered, I do. It was obvious that he was impatient. The priest told them they could exchange rings now. Lianju was the first to put the ring on him. It was unexpected to get married so quickly. Shen Tingwei was still thinking about how loose the ring felt. Hearing Lianju calling him brought him back to his senses. Hurriedly he helped him put on the ring. After exchanging rings, it was time to kiss. Shen Tingwei's heart was pounding. Shyly, he closed his eyes. Lianju looked as if he was full of anticipation. In contrast to Shen Tingwei's shyness at the end, Lianju remained calm and collected. Looking at the marriage certificate handed over by the priest, it bore both his and Lianju's names. Shen Tingwei turned to Lianju and wished him a happy marriage, but the latter remained silent, causing Shen Tingwei's smile to freeze, seemingly devoid of any happiness. At that moment, Lianju turned and walked away, but still responded. Shen Tingwei watched the heavy snow outside. Wondering if he could still return, Lianju appeared somewhat agitated after hanging up the phone. He told Shen Tingwei that the flight was cancelled due to heavy snow and they would have to wait for the snow to stop before returning. Shen Tingwei naturally left all arrangements to him. Upon hearing Lianju ask what he wanted to eat, Shen Tingwei didn't know and could only say anything was fine. Lianju instructed the chef to use fresh ingredients and also mentioned that someone at home couldn't eat oily food, as he noticed Shen Tingwei sneezing. Lianju concerned if he caught a cold, Shen Tingwei hastily said he hadn't. I seldom catch colds. The very next day, he ended up with a high fever in bed. Lianju thoughtfully brought him medicine. Seeing his hesitation, Lianju told him to rest easy. The doctor has already controlled the dosage, and pulled the curtains, advising him to continue sleeping if he felt unwell. So, Shen Tingwei obediently lay down. In the middle of the night, Lianju checked on him to see if the fever had subsided. Feeling the temperature had dropped, he was relieved. But as he was about to leave, Shen Tingwei grabbed him. Don't go, I feel so terrible. The next morning, Shen Tingwei slowly got up to the sound of keyboard clicks. Feeling thirsty and wanting water, he then saw Lianju beside him. Pretending to be asleep again, he wondered why Lianju was there. Then he heard Lianju asking him to wake up and take the thermometer. It seemed he was discovered. Thank you, Mr. Lian, for taking care of me these past few days. Lianju asked him to confirm that there were no issues with the contract on the table and then to sign it. Shen Tingwei was puzzled about what it was, and Lianju told him it was a post-marital property distribution agreement, including real estate, stocks, and money. Shen Tingwei was somewhat surprised and quickly said it wasn't necessary, but Lianju told him it was for the children. Even so, Shen Tingwei still felt it was too early. But Lianju didn't care about that. He just went into boss mode, put it in front of him, and made him sign it. Lianju then took Shen Tingwei to meet his foster father. But he got hit with a stick on the spot. After returning to China, Lianju arranged for a doctor to come every week to check on Shen Tingwei so he wouldn't have to keep going back and forth to the hospital. Ever since registering their marriage with Lianju, aside from the maid and the doctor, only Lianju's assistant would occasionally come to visit. However, such visits seemed more like they were to confirm whether Shen Tingwei was still alive. That day, Shen Tingwei was making dinner when he suddenly heard the sound of the door opening. It was Lianju returning. Shen Tingwei quickly asked him if he had had dinner. Lianju handed him a bag to change into. It turned out to be a suit. After changing, he still felt somewhat uncomfortable. However, Lianju was very satisfied and felt a bit embarrassed to look at him. Shen Tingwei thought something was wrong. Then Lianju took him to the Chen residence, which was very lively tonight. Lianju, initially walking ahead, suddenly stopped and then took Shen Tingwei's hand, linking arms. Only then did he notice Shen Tingwei was not wearing a ring. Feeling a bit awkward, Shen Tingwei explained that the ring was too big and inconvenient to wear, so he had put it away. Lianju didn't say much more but thoughtfully had a servant bring warm water for Shen Tingwei. Along the way, Shen Tingwei looked around and noticed others whispering as they watched them. He suddenly became tense. At this moment, Lianju leaned close to his ear as if to say something, but there was no sound. Shen Tingwei realized that Lianju was just creating the illusion of whispering intimately. Just then, Ning Shui approached them with a glass of red wine. Shen Tingwei finally saw someone he knew and greeted her enthusiastically. But Ning Shui didn't look pleased and coldly remarked, "You sure have a knack for listening to her words." Shen Tingwei is extremely different. Lian Zhu quickly grabbed Shen Tingwei and introduced him to Ning Shui. Seeing this, Ning Shui felt he was humiliating her. Lian Zhu, if you had any regard for our many years of friendship, you wouldn't have brought him here today. You know what today is, she said, as tears began to well up in her eyes. Seeing this, Shen Tingwei hurriedly wanted to find a tissue for her, but Lian Zhu stopped him and saw the wedding ring on Lian Zhu's hand. Ning Shui, heartbroken, turned and left. At this moment, Shen Tingwei realized that this so-called family banquet was not as simple as he thought. And he was definitely not just attending a family dinner as a member of Lian Zhu's family. So he asked Lian Zhu what they were here for today. Hearing Lian Zhu say it was to get engaged to Chen Ning Shui, Shen Tingwei finally understood why he had been brought along. He then asked what he should do to cooperate, and Lian Zhu told him to just stay by his side. Shen Tingwei was also very cooperative, and voluntarily held Lian Zhu's arm. At this moment, Chen Shulian and Yu Man came downstairs. Seeing that Lian Zhu had brought someone along, they immediately showed displeasure and glared at the two of them. Shen Tingwei was instantly scared, and Lian Zhu patted his hand to comfort him, saying it's okay. Second uncle blamed Lian Zhu for bringing anyone into the house. At this time, Shen Su also joined the commotion. Big brother, you can't say that. To you, this person might not be an outsider, but to us, maybe not. Why don't you introduce him? Thus, Lian Zhu introduced Shen Tingwei in front of everyone. This is my lawful partner. As soon as he said this, the whole room was in an uproar. Lian Zhu asked Shen Tingwei to greet everyone. Although a bit embarrassed, Shen Tingwei still called Chen Shulian dad. The other party did not respond but continued to glare at him, listening to Lian Zhu's words. Uncle Air could no longer keep his composure. Faced with Uncle Air's questioning, Lian Zhu began to play dumb. Shen Tingwei couldn't help but admire him. Even when Uncle Air's questioning became pressing, Lian Zhu remained completely calm. Of course, I will not forget the kindness of the Chen family. Suddenly, Shen Tingwei beside him realized something. Uncle Air became more and more agitated, lashing out at Lian Zhu. How could we have chosen you, an ingrate, in the first place? Why did I choose you, a self-serving wolf? You don't respond directly. I guess my second uncle is too old to remember clearly. I wasn't chosen by the Chen family, I was tested into it. But having been in the Chen family for so many years, I might not claim the credit but I surely did the hard work. It's probably time I repaid the kindness of being raised in the early years. Chen Shu, infuriated, gritted his teeth. Indeed, a poorly raised dog. He immediately picked up his walking stick and swung it at Lian Zhu, yelling for him and his people to get out. At that moment, Lian Zhu's face was slashed, starting to bleed. While on a business trip abroad, Lian Zhu was pursued by an admirer. After getting into the car, Shen Ting was very worried as he looked at Lian Zhu. Lian Zhu asked what he was looking at. Shen Ting pointed at the face and told him it was broken. Lian Zhu didn't say much. After getting out of the car, he asked the driver to take Shen Ting back, but Shen Ting proposed to go in with Lian Zhu to help treat his wound. This time Lian Zhu did not refuse. Shen Ting carefully helped him wipe the blood from his face. Not sure if it would leave a scar, it hurt him when iodine was applied for disinfection. Shen Ting hurriedly apologized, then leaned in to gently blow on the area, asking if that felt a bit better. At such a close distance, even Lian Zhu found it hard to maintain composure. Grasping Shen Ting's hand, he said that was enough. He informed Lian Zhu that the wound was shallow and likely wouldn't scar. He suggested applying more medicine when it got better and reminded Lian Zhu to rest well before leaving. What a troublesome day it had been. At night, while trying to sleep, Lian Zhu dreamt of his childhood in the orphanage. That day, he was called for an interview. Upon returning, the director asked how it went. Recalling the interview, Lian Zhu told the director they seemed quite satisfied. The director was also very relieved to hear this. When Lian Zhu was first discovered, he was just over 2 years old, thin and small, hardly able to speak clearly. In the blink of an eye, 13 years had passed. The director encouraged him to seize this opportunity, noting that Lian Zhu had been returned by foster families for many years. Until this day, everyone was curious if he would be sent back again. When leaving, he didn't seem to have any reluctance. The assistant took him to Chen Chu's office and told him about Lian Zhu's situation. When it came to the matter of a name, Chen Chu thought any name would do. The assistant felt a bit troubled, but ultimately, Chen Chu named him Lian Zhu. Dreaming of all this, Lian Zhu woke up suddenly, sweating profusely. Realizing it was just a dream after seeing the chandelier on the ceiling, he then heard his phone ringing. Picking it up, he saw a message from Ning Shui, but it was quickly retracted. Opening her moments, he found out she was going back to Country B. Since he was awake anyway, he decided to make breakfast. Just then, the nanny arrived and saw Lian Zhu intending to make breakfast himself. She quickly stepped forward and took over, saying, "Let me do it, I can make it quickly." Then, he planned to send Ning Shui a message. I didn't expect to be blocked by her, even asking what pregnant nanny should eat. Knowing that there will be an extra child in the family next year, the nanny thinks she should find a chance to talk to Tong Tong. Lianju plans to talk about it after some time. When Shen Tingwei receives a call from Lianju, he thought something happened. Hearing that Lianju has something to say, Shen Tingwei immediately listens with full attention, but Lianju just reminds him that it's rainy recently and to avoid going out, which baffles Shen Tingwei on the spot. Did he call just to remind me about the weather? Then Lianju asked him if he could cook. Knowing he is also worried about the fetus, Shen Tingwei quickly says he will eat more. Lianju tells him that he will be in country S for a month after tomorrow night, and anything needed can be directly told to his assistant. After the call, Shen Tingwei feels bewildered. On this side of the country, seeing the flowers on the desk, Lianju immediately shows displeasure. Don't let such things appear in my office again. The secretary was startled and hurriedly took the flowers away. At this moment, a blond man walked in. Why are the flowers I sent placed at the door and torn apart like this? Lianju casually found an excuse, saying he was allergic to pollen. Alex quickly apologized. To his surprise, he actually believed it. During the negotiation, Alex was very uncompromising. Moreover, his words had hidden meanings. This negotiation was rather tricky. Although he appeared to be about 25 or 26 years old, he was not easily fooled. At this point, Alex directly stood up and slowly approached Lianju. Perhaps we could each take a step back. I'll concede another 10% profit, and you keep tonight free for a date with me. Knowing that Shen Tingwei liked cats, Lianju went straight to the pet store after returning to the country. Alex invited Lianju for a date. Seeing him get so close, Lianju tactically leaned back. Then he showed him the wedding ring on his hand. Alex immediately sat back down. What a pity. It seems they can only have a normal conversation, even after signing the contract. When shaking hands, they used the other hand, cutting off Alex's last hope even more. Although Shen Tingwei no longer works at the amusement park, he still keeps in touch with his former colleagues. The story of him getting a 500,000 membership card recharged by a previous colleague has become a legend over there. The boss often uses it to remind employees about the importance of service attitude. Hearing that Shen Tingwei is very interested in cats, his colleagues immediately sent over a lot of photos. Aren't they just too cute? Seeing this, Shen Tingwei even wanted to raise one himself, but considering he is pregnant, he decided against it. When Tong Tong was on a video call with Lianju, he told him he wanted to join the school's summer camp. After looking at the summer camp itinerary, Lianju didn't say much and agreed. He also reminded him to go to bed early. At this time, he received a message from Shen Tingwei. It turned out that his room's water heater was broken and he wanted to borrow Lianju's bathroom. Lianju agreed immediately. Noticed that Shen Tingwei changed his profile picture to a cat, clicked on his moments. It was all about food and cats. At this moment, he remembered the doctor said that Shen Tingwei's current condition would benefit from having more family around. Shen Tingwei touched his belly. When he was showering and looking in the mirror, there were already signs of a slight bulge. He had been more careful with his meals lately. Although he vomited more than he ate, his appetite had increased. His sleep quality also improved. Just as he turned off the lights to sleep, he received a message from Lianju. Hearing Shen Tingwei's voice message reply, Lianju could imagine his drowsy look just from the sound. He found it amusing. A month later, when he returned to the country, his assistant came to the airport to pick him up. They hit a traffic jam on the way back. Just as Lianju was feeling irritated, he spotted a pet store. He immediately asked the driver to stop the car. When he went in, he saw the cats inside. I remembered that Shen Tingwei mentioned liking cats before, and the assistant thought he was going to buy one for the young master. At this moment, Lianju took out his phone to show him a picture of a cat. The assistant told Lianju it was a stray cat, commonly known as a street cat, and probably not available in pet stores. So, he recommended a ragdoll cat with a gentle temperament, which the young master might like, but Lianju was not interested. Just as he was about to leave, a cat's paw caught his clothing from behind. He turned around to see a small gray kitten looking up at him with wide eyes. A gray kitten is staring at him with wide eyes, and Lianju approached to find it really cute. Thinking that Shen Tingwei should like it, Shen Tingwei looks pregnant. The assistant reminded Lianju that Mrs. Shen is pregnant now and it might not be appropriate to keep a cat. At that moment, a woman came out and told him based on her experience that it's okay as long as they deworm regularly and maintain good hygiene. Hearing that his wife has never had a cat, the woman recommended a British Shorthair to him, saying its gentle nature is very suitable for beginners. While talking, she opened the cage to show him, and the next second, the kitten jumped directly into Lianju's arms. The woman told Lianju that pregnant women can often become emotionally down during pregnancy, and having a pet for company would be better. So, Lianju decided to buy it. While the assistant took the kitten, Lianju stayed to continue looking at pet supplies. At this moment, the woman's husband came back with new stock. Hearing that his wife ate takeout, the man thought it was unhygienic, and the two started bickering immediately. Suddenly interrupted by a man coming over to settle the bill, the man informs Lianju it's his first time being a father. Not until his wife's belly grew did he start to feel a bit responsible. Hearing this, Lianju relates to himself, unclear about what it feels like to be a father. To him, raising a child isn't a very difficult task, and he can ensure a carefree life for the child, but seldom thinks about how to be a good father. Looking at the woman's protruding belly, Lianju is curious about how old the child is. The woman tells him it's almost 9 months. This gets Lianju to start imagining the look of Shin Tingwei with a big belly. Once everything is ready, he directly asks his assistant to drive to Shin Tingwei's place. On the way, he starts to imagine the joyful look on Shin Tingwei's face upon seeing the kitten, becoming somewhat impatient and asking the driver to go faster. Upon reaching the doorstep, the driver immediately brakes, followed by Lianju breaking out in a cold sweat when he sees the doorway filled with police cars. Then, a police officer comes up to knock on the window, immediately presenting his badge and requesting Lianju to cooperate with them for questioning. Shin Tingwei came to the hospital for a prenatal checkup. The doctor performed an ultrasound and located the baby. Do you see here? Listening to the doctor talk about the baby's heartbeat, Shin Tingwei was so excited that the doctor specifically played the sound for him to hear. At the moment he heard the baby's heartbeat, Shin Tingwei was at a loss for words, tears uncontrollably rolling down. Then he went to the restroom to wash his face and adjust himself, thinking about how embarrassingly he had just cried. Touching his stomach and looking at himself in the mirror, he now has a baby. He just recorded the video of the fetal heartbeat and listened to it several times. Suddenly, he understood those who extravagantly show off their children. He now can hardly contain the urge to share his feelings. But upon further thought, it seemed there was no one in this world to share it with. After hesitating for a while, he still sent the video to Lianju. Not sure what he was expecting, whether Lianju would be as happy as he was. After a long while, he hadn't received a reply from Lianju. Though a bit disappointed, he thought maybe Lianju was just busy. At that moment, a colleague called to invite him on a trip to Qingyuan Mountain. She had arranged everything for the 2-day and 1-night trip, just waiting for Shin Tingwei. Having not gone out for a long time, Shin Tingwei was quite looking forward to it and decided to agree after some thought. The colleague was about to drive over to pick him up immediately, which completely surprised him. And you said you were not here to experience life. I was worried you wouldn't have enough to eat or wear, yet you live in a villa. Hearing this, Shin Tingwei said the house belonged to his partner. The colleague thought it was the lady who lost her necklace last time. At this, Shin Tingwei felt somewhat embarrassed and told his colleague it wasn't her, that lady was his brother. Hearing this, the colleague was utterly dumbfounded. After Lianju was taken away by the police, his brother went straight to Shin Tingwei's place to make a scene. The scenery from the cable car is really nice. Shin Tingwei keeps taking pictures with his phone. He plans to show them to his colleagues later. At this moment, a colleague, scared of heights, is already trembling with fear. Shin Tingwei suggests taking a photo for her, so the colleague stiffly cooperates. When it's time to choose photos, they discover many unflattering ones and immediately want to delete this dark history. Then, seeing a video in the album, wondering what it is, Shin Tingwei immediately tells her it's the fetal heartbeat of a friend's child. The colleague is interested in it and, with Shin Tingwei's permission, listens to the thumping heartbeat, finding it amazing. It sounds like little horse hooves, so cute. Just then, feeling hungry, they decide to have dinner after getting off the cable car. After so long, Lianju still hasn't replied to the messages, and no one is answering the calls. Shin Tingwei started to get worried. While having dinner, he saw something on the TV that made him suddenly widen his eyes. A colleague noticed something was wrong and then saw him abruptly stand up. The TV was showing footage of Lianju being arrested by the police. Shin Tingwei could hardly believe his eyes. He then went outside to call Lianju's assistant. Hearing Shin Tingwei ask about Lianju, the assistant quickly apologized, saying they had been too busy to inform him. Shin Tingwei guessed that it was the Chen family who did it. The assistant told him that the details were still under investigation. They had already hired a lawyer, so he shouldn't worry. After hanging up, a colleague came out to check if something was wrong. Learning that it was his partner who was in trouble, the colleague asked if he wanted to go back, but Shin Tingwei shook his head, saying it would be the same if he went back tomorrow. He doesn't need me, someone will handle it for him. If I went over, I would only add to the chaos. I still came back early in the morning. Thinking that it was rare to go out and have fun, and yet it affected my colleague's enjoyment, Shin Tingwei felt somewhat guilty. Suddenly, he heard someone forcefully kicking the door. The sound was from the person I met last time at the Chen's house. Feeling that the visitor had bad intentions, Shin Tingwei quickly took out his phone to send a message to his assistant. Then he went over and opened the door. The next second, Chen Su entered with a group of people, completely ignoring Shen Tingwei's questions. He sat down on the sofa like a boss and started pointing at the furniture inside the room. He ordered his men to throw all these things out. Shen Tingwei couldn't bear it anymore and walked up to Chen Su. What do you mean by this? Finally, Chen Su began to look at him properly. Seeing Shen Tingwei like this, he had to admit that Lian Zhu's judgment was still quite good. He stood up and mocked Shen Tingwei. I said Lian Zhu is already inside. Do you still plan to squat in our Chen family's house and not leave? Shen Tingwei didn't understand what he meant. Chen Su then added, not to mention this house, even Lian Zhu himself is owned by the Chen family. Speaking of the baby's heartbeat, Shen Tingwei was so happy that he gestured wildly, then received a look from Lian Zhu as if he was looking at an idiot. Chen Su recalled that when his uncle first adopted Lian Zhu, he not only provided him with a luxurious life and the best education but even entrusted him with the most important company in the family conglomerate. He even entrusted the most important company in the family group to him, while he only got an insignificant little business, becoming a laughingstock for many years. Thinking about it made him angry, so he spoke to Shen Tingwei harshly. Are you planning to leave on your own, or should I kick you out? At this moment, the assistant arrived just in time to see Shen Tingwei being thrown out and then pushed to the ground. The assistant was terrified and quickly rushed forward to help him up. Do you need me to call a doctor? Shen Tingwei told him it was fine and explained the situation. The assistant reassured him not to worry. He suggested Shen Tingwei rest in the car while he handled it. A moment later, Chen Su, looking extremely angry, came out of the villa with his subordinates. As he left, he glared at Shen Tingwei. The assistant told Shen Tingwei that everything was fine now and he could go back in. They wouldn't come back again. Shen Tingwei didn't understand, so the assistant explained that the house belonged to him. President Lian transferred the property to your name last month, along with shares in the overseas company and a sum of money. President Lian has been prepared for a while, so you don't need to worry too much. This will be over soon. Afterward, Shen Tingwei followed the lawyer to the detention center. When he looked up, he finally saw Lian Zhu. Shen Tingwei sized him up from head to toe. Although Lian Zhu seemed much thinner, he still sat upright, spoke calmly, and his expression hadn't changed much from before. Suddenly, their eyes met, and Shen Tingwei quickly lowered his head in embarrassment. Seeing the lawyer stand up, Shen Tingwei thought the visiting time was over. The lawyer told him there were still 10 minutes. Have a chat with President Lian. The moment they picked up the phone, both were silent, not knowing what to say. Lian Zhu was the first to break the awkward silence. You've gained weight, leaving Shen Tingwei touching his face, full of question marks. Hearing Lian Zhu mention the stomach, Shen Tingwei realized and told Lian Zhu that it had been more than 3 months. Now they could already hear the baby's heartbeat. After Lian Zhu replied, the conversation fell into silence again. At this moment, Lian Zhu asked him what the baby's heartbeat was like. Shen Tingwei immediately began to gesture happily, while Lian Zhu gave him a look as if he were an idiot. Shen Tingwei felt a bit embarrassed and said they weren't allowed to bring in phones. Otherwise, he would have shown him a video. If he had to describe it, it was very regular, very strong, and also very magical. Before he could finish speaking, the officer informed them that visiting time was over. Helplessly, they had to end it there. As he left, Shen Tingwei was very reluctant and looked back at Lian Zhu. Lian Zhu was also looking at him from inside, but his expression was very calm. Then the door slowly closed until he could no longer see him. Meanwhile, Auntie had already prepared food for Tong Tong, but he was still playing with the kitten. During dinner, seeing the empty seat beside her, Tong Tong started missing her dad again. Auntie, did Dad call today? For a moment, the aunt didn't know what to say. Then she remembered that Lian Zhu mentioned there would be another child in the family next year, and she couldn't help but feel sorry for Tong Tong. Suddenly, they heard a knock on the door. It turned out to be Lian Zhu's assistant. The assistant told her that President Lian had sent these things over. At this moment, the aunt quietly asked the assistant if something had happened to Mr. Lian. The assistant could only use the excuse of being busy with work to brush her off. The aunt didn't understand. No matter how busy he is, he should have time to come home for a meal, right? He has time to buy a cat and send it over but not to come back? The assistant didn't know what to say. He could only joke, saying that the kitten was sent to keep the young master entertained. The aunt stopped asking, but then she mentioned the other child. Are you really not planning to tell Tong Tong? Or are you going to wait until the child is born? At this moment, Tong Tong was hiding behind the door. Is Dad going to have his own child? Originally, she was supposed to pick Lian Zhu up from prison but ended up sleeping the whole way, using him as a pillow. A month had passed since the last visit to Lian Zhu. This morning, while Shen Tingwei was changing clothes, he found that many of his old clothes no longer fit. Just then, the assistant called, and it was Lian Zhu's voice on the line. Shen Tingwei was so excited that he didn't know what to say. The assistant told him that President Lian was fine now. Hearing that Lian Zhu was fine, Shen Tingwei finally breathed a sigh of relief. Just as he was about to put on his pants, he found the button wouldn't fasten. Looks like he's grown. The next day, at the entrance of the detention center, the assistant brought Shen Tingwei over early. At this moment, Shen Tingwei felt dazed, not fully awake. Ever since becoming pregnant, he had been very sleepy. Then the door opened, and Shen Tingwei immediately perked up. He saw Lian Zhu, impeccably dressed in a suit, walking out. Seeing Lian Zhu coming over, Shen Tingwei quickly moved to the seat beside him. Just moving this short distance feels very strenuous. At this moment, Lian Zhu opens the car door. Shen Tingwei immediately apologizes and tries to move away, but Lian Zhu tells him not to move. Even though he just came out, Lian Zhu is still very dedicated to his work, asking his assistant to send him the documents. After going through these events, Shen Tingwei truly realizes what kind of person Lian Zhu is. At first, he thought Lian Zhu was very harsh and domineering, with his actions and personality causing an indescribable sense of oppression and fear. Later, he discovers that Lian Zhu is actually a very careful person. His aloof and unapproachable demeanor made Shen Tingwei think he was cold-hearted and indifferent at one point. But sometimes, he could see a side of Lian Zhu that was understanding of human emotions and tactfully smooth. He feels that Lian Zhu is really a contradictory person. At this moment, Lian Zhu calls out to Shen Tingwei, but he doesn't react at all, having unexpectedly fallen asleep. The assistant mentions the company's matters to Lian Zhu but gets interrupted. Lian Zhu tells him to talk about it at the company. It's been a long time since he used his phone, and upon opening it, there are 99+ messages. But Lian Zhu skips over these messages and specifically looks for the ones from Shen Tingwei. Inside, there's information about the fetal heartbeat and the ultrasound, while Shen Tingwei sleeps beside me. That little thing is right there. At this moment, I noticed the video on top, and when I clicked on it, there was no sound. Until I turned up the volume and held it close to my ear, I heard a thumping heartbeat. Just like Shen Tingwei described earlier, very rhythmic, powerful, and wonderful. I noticed Shen Tingwei leaning on my shoulder. Lian Zhu did not push him away. After arriving at the villa, the assistant, being very perceptive, spoke softly to Mr. Lian. And Mr. Lian immediately understood and called the driver to get out of the car. At this moment, Lian Zhu called out to Shen Tingwei, but he rubbed against him like a little cat. He did not wake up. Lian Zhu sighed helplessly. Until he reached out to touch Shen Tingwei's cheek. He just woke up, and Lian Zhu told him they had already arrived home. Shen Tingwei immediately came to his senses and hurriedly moved his body away. How embarrassing was that? Lian Zhu didn't say anything and just got out of the car directly. Shen Tingwei's face turned red with shame as he rushed home to apologize to Lian Zhu for dozing off earlier. Although Lian Zhu said he understood, he didn't say much. Shen Tingwei started to blame himself. Falling asleep was one thing, but to use Lian Zhu as a pillow all the way, he didn't know if Lian Zhu was angry. I'm not sure if he's angry. Even when changing clothes upstairs, I smelled flowers. Turning my head, I saw the blossoming flowers on the table. It seems Shen Tingwei has managed the house well. When going downstairs, I noticed the living room furniture was brand new. Recalling the assistant's tattling about Chen Su causing trouble at home, no matter what Shen Tingwei said, I insisted the assistant replace all the furniture Chen Su had touched. It seems all the furniture now was chosen by Shen Tingwei. At this moment, I heard some noises. Shen Tingwei was busy cooking in the kitchen. Hearing the sound behind him, he turned around and saw it was me coming. Shen Tingwei was a bit panicked and afraid. I was still angry but still mustered the courage to go forward. I'm making lunch, do you want to stay and eat together? The doctor just questioned my assessment of Shen Tingwei. The next second, he was met with my deadly glare. Seeing Shen Tingwei smiling and inviting me to stay for lunch, Lian Zhu was momentarily stunned, his mind flashing back to various scenes, amidst Shen Tingwei's repeated calls. It was only then that Lian Zhu suddenly came to his senses. Thinking he was still angry about the incident in the car, Shen Tingwei hurriedly tried to make amends, but Lian Zhu turned around and left without saying a word. Shen Tingwei wanted to say something more to keep him there, but he stopped himself, not understanding why just leaning on his shoulder would make him disliked to such an extent. When Lian Zhu got back home and saw his dad had returned, Tong Tong immediately ran out happily and threw himself into Lian Zhu's arms. This enthusiasm from Tong Tong contrasted sharply with the current mood, but he still symbolically patted his head. During the quiet reading time at noon, the whole house was very quiet, with only the sound of the kitten playing. It was then that Lian Zhu realized, was the house always this quiet? Thinking of Shen Tingwei in the villa, why could he, living alone, create such a lively atmosphere? Tong Tong sneaked a glance at Lian Zhu, who noticed immediately. Lian Zhu sternly told him to sit up straight and read properly. Tong Tong felt wronged and went back to his room with the book. Seeing Tong Tong like this made Lianju quite helpless. He still can't interact with him like a normal father and son, even doubting whether his decision to adopt Tong Tong was a mistake. He recalled the first time he met Tong Tong. His father had just passed away from illness, and his mother had abandoned him. At that time, he was not yet 5 years old, but his mental maturity and sensitivity were much greater than those of his peers. After being adopted, he always acted cautiously. He always observed the expressions and words of those around him. Lianju wondered if it was because they hadn't seen each other for a few months, and the relationship that had eased due to the household registration issue had reverted to square one. Therefore, Lianju visited that hospital again, where Dr. Liu was somewhat surprised as it had been a long time. It has been 2 years since Lianju last came to see him. The first time the doctor met Lianju, he was still a student. Then, he received nearly 10 years of psychological treatment in his clinic. The last time they met, the doctor's advice to him was to try to establish some mental support for himself. After that, Lianju never came to see her again until today. The doctor was curious whether Lianju had tried her previous suggestion. Lianju told her he had, and then told her about adopting a child. From Lianju's expression, it was clear that the result was not good. The doctor wondered what the problem was and heard that Lianju had gotten married. The doctor immediately paused, asking if it was because of what she had said. Learning it wasn't, the doctor thought getting married was a good thing, and thus was curious about what kind of person his partner was. At this, various images of Shin Tingwei began to emerge in Lianju's mind. Finally, it settled on that smile, so Lianju gave the most fitting adjective. The warm-hearted doctor looked incredulous, feeling that the doctor was questioning his assessment of Shin Tingwei, and Lianju immediately glared at the doctor in annoyance. The doctor hurriedly explained that this wasn't what he meant. It's just that it doesn't seem like him to use such words to describe others. Although he finds Shin Tingwei very warm, Lianju feels very uncomfortable about it. When asked by the doctor if he still feels very resistant, Lianju nods repeatedly. Then Lianju starts to ask the doctor that question. After Lianju leaves, a nurse comes in curious about what was wrong with that handsome guy, as he seemed quite normal. The doctor inhales and says he suffers from a severe lack of affection. The nurse feels it's such a pity after hearing this but mentions she's never seen him come here before. The doctor tells the nurse that the handsome guy hasn't been here for a long time, remembering his first visit when he had just started high school. Back then, the daughter of his foster family went hiking with him and broke her leg in front of him, crying heartbreakingly, but he had no reaction. Only when his sister called his name did he go over to help. Afterwards, he came to find himself, hoping to undergo psychological intervention. The nurse is curious about what he came for this time, but the doctor just teases her with suspense. When Tong Tong went to summer camp, she happily waved goodbye to Lianjue. Although Lianjue responded, he was expressionless, recalling the time in the hospital when he asked the doctor how others interact with their families. The doctor told him that if he wanted to integrate into the family, he could start by preparing surprises for them. Today, Lianjue seems very different, almost like a gentle and kind man. After arriving at the summer camp destination, Tong Tong started unpacking. When she unzipped her bag, she found her favorite teddy bear. This is so awesome. This teddy bear is a character from her favorite cartoon, The Great Maritime Adventure, and it even came with a card with a line from the show. Tong Tong happily called her aunt immediately to thank her. Thank you, Auntie, I love the little captain. Her aunt didn't understand what she was talking about. It seems it wasn't from her aunt. At this moment, Tong Tong opened the card and recognized at a glance that it was from his father. His classmates urged him to join the assembly, so Tong Tong quickly wiped away his tears, put down the little captain, and ran downstairs. Shin Tingwei was also very surprised because Lianju brought him a cat. Is this cat raised by you, Mr. Lian? As he said this, he leaned towards Lianju, but this time Lianju did not refuse his closeness. Remembering that the aunt in front was worried about the cat at home being unattended, Lianju told her someone would take care of it, so he brought it to Shin Tingwei. Vaguely, Lianju seemed to smell that familiar scent of alcohol from Shin Tingwei. He was initially very happy, but Shin Tingwei immediately covered up the cat and told Lianju to let someone else take care of it, as he was now pregnant and it seemed not very suitable to keep pets. At this, Lianju told him that there are no toxoplasmosis risks to pregnant women and fetuses. Shin Tingwei was embarrassed by Lianju's thoughtful consideration. Lianju was somewhat embarrassed and quickly changed the subject to ask when the doctor would come. Shin Tingwei told him it would be in the afternoon. Then he opened the cat carrier and took out the kitten. It was too cute. Shin Tingwei couldn't help but want to get close to the kitten. Suddenly, he noticed that Lianju was staring at him from the side, which was quite embarrassing. So, Shin Tingwei quickly used the kitten to cover his face. The doctor said today's checkup should reveal the baby's facial features and gender. Do you want to see it together? Lianju looked at him and responded indifferently. Shin Tingwei happily played with the kitten, asking Lian Zhu if he had a name for it. Upon hearing this, Shin Tingwei was stunned. Lian Zhu wondered what was wrong. Shin Tingwei quickly said it was nothing, very cute, but thinking about how Lian Zhu seriously said the name Mimi, he found it inexplicably funny. In the afternoon, the doctor arrived and noticed that Shin Tingwei looked even better than before. Shin Tingwei also felt that his appetite had been increasing lately. Last night while bathing, he even felt his stomach moving. According to his description, it felt like bubbles gently popping. At this time, Lian Zhu was continuously watching Shin Tingwei, feeling that it was rare to see him so lively. The doctor, understanding the general situation, was about to start the examination. The doctor asked if President Lian would like to come over to watch. Seeing that Lian Zhu did not respond, Shin Tingwei felt that he probably was not interested in this matter. So, he told the doctor it was okay. Suddenly, he saw Lian Zhu step forward, and even glanced at him. The doctor, while examining, explained the meanings of these values to Lian Zhu. Shin Tingwei watched Lian Zhu from the side. His focused expression was truly charming. The doctor told Shin Tingwei that as the months of pregnancy increased, the secretion of hormones in the pregnant woman would become more vigorous. Hearing this, Shin Tingwei couldn't help but wonder if it would also affect pheromones. As he was about to get up, Lian Zhu considerately reached out his hand to him. The doctor asked if they would like to know the sex of the child, but the two gave different responses. After looking at each other, Shin Tingwei shook his head, saying he did not want to know. At this moment, Lian Zhu looked at him, puzzled. Shin Tingwei was at a loss. Can we not spoil the surprise so soon? So, when the doctor asked about the decision, Lian Zhu also said it wasn't necessary. After the doctor left, Shin Tingwei hesitated for a moment but still asked, "Do you want a boy?" Because in Shin Tingwei's former world, there were as many as 6 genders after differentiation. Even so, gender discrimination still existed, with male alphas often holding the best social resources, followed by female alphas. Although not quite understanding the situation in this current world, what he had learned from movies and books was more or less the same. Seeing Lian Zhu's reaction just now, Shin Tingwei wasn't sure if he would also. But then Lian Zhu said it didn't matter, he was fine with either a boy or a girl. After saying that, Lian Zhu glanced at Shin Tingwei, who felt a bit embarrassed being looked at like that, so he quickly made his escape. Shin Tingwei thought it was just his imagination, suddenly feeling that Lian Zhu didn't seem as cold as before. On the Chen family's side, Chen Shu was surprised to hear that Lian Zhu was released so quickly and decided to start causing trouble for him. Give me back everything I gave you before, with interest, even as Lian Zhu's financial chain is having issues. Shin Tingwei didn't hesitate to use his family's resources to help, and the assistant brought the documents Lian Zhu requested. Seeing them discussing business, Shin Tingwei quickly took the kitten away so as not to disturb them. Holding the kitten, he went to the room, but it mischievously started scratching the bedsheets, and Shin Tingwei was about to scold it. "If you scratch the sheets again, I'll throw you outside to the big gray wolf." Surprisingly, the kitten backed down immediately. It seems it's really afraid of the big gray wolf. This made Shin Tingwei unconsciously think of Lian Zhu. Perhaps his cold, expressionless face could indeed frighten children. Then he remembered the WeChat message he sent earlier, and how he pointedly mentioned that the kitten had been dewormed, which is safe for pregnant women. Could this kitten be a gift from him? Thinking this, Shin Tingwei immediately blushed, feeling like he was perhaps reading too much into it. At this moment, the kitten kept meowing. It seemed hungry because the cat food was in the living room. Shin Tingwei had to go downstairs. Lian Zhu asked him what he was looking for. Shin Tingwei told him he was looking for cat food because the kitten was hungry. Lian Zhu told him the cat food was on the dining table. While fetching it, he heard an assistant talking about cash flow issues. Assets were frozen. Based on what he just heard, Shin Tingwei guessed that the assistant was referring to the temporary freezing of properties in company accounts during Lian Zhu's nearly 1-month detention, causing problems with the company's cash flow. Therefore, Shin Tingwei quickly walked to the drawer, lifted up the books, and took out a bank card. As they were about to leave after their conversation, Shin Tingwei came down and stopped Lian Zhu. He then handed him the bank card. "I don't know how much money you need. Here, and the ones you gave me before, you can use them first." The assistant, seeing the card, felt the amount was very substantial. Additionally, using the promissory note previously transferred into Mr. Shin's name by Lian Zhu as an emergency fund was not a bad choice. Unexpectedly, Shin Tingwei would stand up to help himself at this time. The assistant told Shin Tingwei, "This is the marriage security provided by Mr. Lian. You just keep it." But Shin Tingwei couldn't just sit back and do nothing. He told Lian Zhu that if it still wasn't enough, perhaps they should sell the house first. That day, Shin Tingwei stood outside the villa with the cat in his arms, unable to believe they had to move so soon. Remembering Lian Zhu seemed to have financial difficulties before, he suggested selling the house. He even handed his bank card to Lian Zhu. Looking at the flowers and plants in the yard, he felt a bit reluctant, but there was no other way. Then, his assistant drove him to the city. Shen Tingwei thought Lian Zhu had bought or perhaps rented a house in the city. Wondering if living in the city would be inconvenient, after a while, the assistant dropped him off. Shen Tingwei opened the door and saw that the interior's luxury was no less than that of the villa, and there was even a cat climbing frame. The cat was very excited upon seeing it, hopping up and down as if it was very familiar with the place. Suddenly, Shen Tingwei realized, could this be Lian Zhu's own home? Before, Lian Zhu was totally unwilling to stay with me. Now that he has taken me to live with him, thinking about it, Shen Tingwei feels even more that Lian Zhu is really short of money. At this moment, an assistant came over to tell Shen Tingwei that his luggage had been moved upstairs and placed in front of his room door, asking if he needed help with arranging them. Shen Tingwei quickly said it was not necessary. The moment he pushed open the door, he was shocked by the interior. The room was exactly the same as the one he lived in before. There was also a wardrobe, and the bedding and daily necessities were all the styles he used to use. Shen Tingwei quickly slapped his face to stop himself from thinking too much. After being busy for a long time, he finally got everything arranged. Then he heard some noise and went out to see. It turned out to be the renovation assistant telling him. It turned out that the renovation assistant told him that these were the anti-peeping glass specially ordered by Mr. Lian. Shen Tingwei was stunned on the spot after hearing it. This was the very issue he had been worried about, yet Lian Zhu had guessed it and quietly alleviated his concern. This reminded him of the day when Lian Zhu held a bank card. Shen Tingwei told him that the commission from the 500,000 membership card recharge was also included. The assistant behind him couldn't help but laugh after hearing this. The assistant said the young master would return. Shen Tingwei thought Lian Zhu had a family, feeling very uncomfortable inside. When Shen Tingwei was feeding the cat, Lian Zhu happened to come back from work. Shen Tingwei greeted him warmly, and after Lian Zhu responded, he went straight to the kitchen. Learning that Lian Zhu hadn't had dinner, Shen Tingwei immediately wanted to go help, but was refused by Lian Zhu. Shen Tingwei didn't walk away scared like before, but approached carefully and pushed Lian Jia away. Do you want something to eat? If not, I'll just choose. Before he could finish, Lian Jia mentioned Crucian carp tofu soup. He really has changed. Shen Tingwei happily agreed. Luckily, he had made this soup before and thought it wouldn't be a problem this time. Soon, the steaming Crucian carp tofu soup was ready. Although the process was a bit chaotic, he then went upstairs to call Lian Jia for dinner. Suddenly, he heard coughing from behind the half-open door, sounded like someone was on the phone, and suddenly the door opened. Shen Tingwei was startled. Lian Jia quickly looked for an ashtray to extinguish his cigarette. In order not to hurt him and the baby, Lian Jia quickly closed the door and continued. The call was from Yu Man. She told Lian Zhu that Ning Shui had been calling Chen Shu Lian frequently these days, probably regarding his issue. Based on Lian Zhu's understanding of Chen Shu Lian, he indeed has the kind of personality that seeks retribution and wouldn't give anyone the chance to turn against him. Originally charged with the crime of duty encroachment, it was expected to be a tough case. However, he was quickly released due to insufficient evidence. It seems that Chen Ning Shui played a key role in this. After Lian Zhu finished the call, the meal was already prepared, and there was a small note on the chair. It turned out to be from Shen Tingwei, who heard his coughing and advised him to smoke less. Upon reading this note, something stirred inside Lian Zhu. At that moment, he received a message from Ning Shui inviting him to come over. It also included a phrase allowing him to bring family members. When alone at home, Shen Tingwei learned to do crafts and even asked an assistant to help buy some new lore-related books. On the one hand, she didn't want her years of university studies to go to waste, and on the other, she wanted to understand more about the world. She then thought about the last time Lian Zhu was taken away, and she could do nothing but wait. I thought learning the laws of this world might be somewhat helpful. Since I have a foundation, it's not too difficult to learn now. Recently, my interactions with Lian Zhu have been more comfortable than before. Although he leaves early every morning before I come downstairs, he does come back for dinner. Since then, I've always prepared a bit more for dinner to leave a portion for Lian Zhu. Occasionally, when I want to try new dishes, I would write down the planned dishes on a sticky note the day before and stick it on the fridge for Lian Zhu to choose. Most of the time, he doesn't have any preferences. He would just put a small cross next to the dish. I seem to have gotten used to this method now. At this moment, I received a call from the assistant. Lian Zhu asked the assistant to inform me that the young master is coming home this afternoon. Hearing this, I dropped the tools in my hands. I couldn't believe it. The assistant continued to say that the last time Mr. Lian registered for a membership at your workplace amusement park in the young master's name, it was Miss Chen who took him there. I then remembered that child. So, it means Lian Zhu has had a family. It also made me realize I know nothing about him. The news came too suddenly. I was a bit emotional after hearing this but quickly calmed down and asked the assistant if there was anything I needed to do. The assistant immediately noticed the change in my emotions. He quickly explained the young master's background, choking up while telling his own story. Now, Shin Tingwei knew about the child's origins, and his assistant also told him that he could search for news online. After hanging up the phone, Shin Tingwei recalled the night Lian Zhu took him to the Chen family. From his conversation with Chen Shu, he could vaguely guess, does that mean Lian Zhu also had a tough time in the orphanage? He then looked up Kong Tong's information and indeed found it to be just as his assistant had said. Seeing his plight, Shin Tingwei couldn't help but shed tears, and driven by curiosity, he looked up the news about Lian Zhu's adoption. Looking at the overwhelming amount of news and information online, Shin Tingwei felt increasingly uncomfortable. In the news, Lian Zhu seemed like he was stripped naked and thrown into the public eye, subject to everyone's arbitrary judgment or pity. Chen Shu was using everyone's gaze to constantly remind Lian Zhu that everything he had was given by the Chen family, pressing his head to make him feel grateful. Shin Tingwei, learning the full story, couldn't hold back his tears anymore, following the strong scent of alcohol. Lian Zhu found Shin Tingwei, with a dazed look, after Tong Tong came back in the afternoon. He found a stranger sitting quietly at home. Shin Tingwei helped him recall someone they had seen before at the amusement park. Then Tong Tong remembered, it was the brother from before. Then why are you at my house? Shin Tingwei told him that Lian Zhu had asked him to come over, while Shin Tingwei was putting away a book. He noticed Tong Tong stealing glances at him. What's wrong? Learning that Shin Tingwei is a friend of his dad, Tong Tong naturally treated Shin Tingwei as a friend too. Isn't that too adorable? Then Tong Tong asked Shin Tingwei if he likes drinking a lot, leaving Shin Tingwei with a puzzled look. But then he quickly realized that he thought it was the pheromones causing another disorder, making the glands emit a smell that Tong Tong noticed. At this moment, Tong Tong pointed at his belly and said, my deskmate calls this a beer belly. My math teacher's belly looks like this too. Drinking too much alcohol will make it grow. Shin Tingwei was amused by his cute remark. He was originally considering how to explain the big belly to him, but now Tong Tong had provided such an innocent and adorable reason himself. Tong Tong advised Shin Tingwei to drink less beer as it's bad for his health. So, Shin Tingwei took Tong Tong to make cream puffs together. Lian Zhu came back from work and heard laughter coming from the kitchen. When Shin Tingwei stepped back, he suddenly bumped into Lian Zhu behind him. He turned around and was surprised to see Lian Zhu. Mr. Lian, why are you back so early today? I didn't know you'd be back so early, the meal hasn't even started yet. At this moment, Lian Zhu stepped forward and stood in front of Shin Tingwei. Lian Zhu stepped forward to protect Shin Tingwei. Seeing his dad's serious expression, Tong Tong immediately wilted like a frosted eggplant. Seeing Tong Tong's disappointed look, Shin Tingwei quickly went up to comfort him, offering the cream puffs he made. Go eat these with Dad, we'll have dinner soon. Holding the puff, Tong Tong asked Brother Shin how long he would stay at home. Faced with Tong Tong's question, Shin Tingwei asked back how long he hoped he would stay. Tong Tong blushed, it would be nice if brother could stay here forever. This heartwarming answer stunned Shin Tingwei. After that, he was very sensible in his interactions with Tong Tong. Clingy but not annoying. Whenever Shin Tingwei did housework, he would help by his side, and when Shin Tingwei read a book, he would also quietly read one next to him. Seeing the collar on the kitten's neck, Tong Tong was surprised. Brother Shin, you've already fixed the cat's collar? Seeing Tong Tong liked it very much, Shin Tingwei asked if he wanted one too. The next second, Tong Tong was looking at him with eager anticipation. Shin Tingwei teased if he also wanted to be a little kitten. There was indeed some yarn left, which should be enough to knit him a scarf. Besides, the weather was about to get cooler, so he got up and prepared to take Tong Tong to choose the color of the yarn. Suddenly, he felt dizzy and almost couldn't stand steady. As the fetus grew, the pheromones in his body also started to become unstable. Shin Tingwei was not good at drinking alcohol in the first place, and every time his body emitted this wine aroma, it would make his head spin. Shin Tingwei told Tong Tong that it was nothing, just a sudden dizziness. But Tong Tong was still scared by his appearance just now. To keep him from worrying, Shin Tingwei decided to play a game with him. When Lian Zhu came home from work in the evening, he saw Tong Tong covering his eyes and counting. Lian Zhu asked why he was still not sleeping so late. Upon hearing his father's voice, Tong Tong quickly opened his eyes. Dad, I'm playing hide and seek with Brother Shin. At this moment, Lian Zhu smelled that wine aroma again. Following the scent, he opens the door only to see Shin Tingwei sitting on the ground, his face flushed. Noticing Lian Zhu's return, Shin Tingwei looks at him with a dazed expression. To prevent Tong Tong from disturbing Shin Tingwei, Lian Zhu tells Tong Tong that there is a baby in Shin Tingwei's belly. Faced with Shin Tingwei's enticing appearance, Lian Zhu, however, is indifferent and then seems somewhat angry. Just as Shin Tingwei is about to say something, Lian Zhu directly interrupts and asks him to come out. Shin Tingwei slaps his cheeks to sober up, embarrassed by his previous state. Tong Tong stands in the living room like a child who has done something wrong. Seeing the two of them coming over, his father stands in front of him with a very serious expression. Shin Tingwei quickly steps in front of Tong Tong, about to explain, but Lianju scolds the two of them together. Shin Tingwei doesn't dare to speak anymore. Seeing Shin Tingwei holding his stomach, Lianju doesn't say anything more and turns to go upstairs. Shin Tingwei turned around and whispered to Tong Tong, "Your dad is angry." At this moment, Lianju suddenly stopped and called Tong Tong over. Tong Tong looked at Shin Tingwei innocently. Shin Tingwei, who returned to the room, felt very uneasy. At this moment, Tong Tong was called to the study by Lianju. The conversation was about a game he had suggested and allowing Tong Tong to stay up late, which ended up getting Tong Tong scolded. After a while, Tong Tong came out of the study. Lianju reminded him to go to bed early. When he passed by Shin Tingwei's room, he noticed the door was open and the light was still on, so he slowly approached. Shin Tingwei noticed the movement at the door and immediately guessed it was Tong Tong. He signaled for him to come over. After hesitating for a moment, Tong Tong went over. Shin Tingwei asked if he had been scolded by his dad. Tong Tong told him he hadn't. When asked if he was unhappy, he shook his head. Then Tong Tong looked up at Shin Tingwei and said, "Dad said you have a baby in your tummy, so I shouldn't always disturb you." Shin Tingwei hugged him and comforted him, saying it wasn't true. At this moment, Tong Tong curiously asked if Shin Tingwei was not a boy. Facing Tong Tong's inquiry, Shin Tingwei became somewhat flustered and then told Tong Tong that since it's very painful for girls to give birth, he wanted to share some of their hardship. After hearing this, Tong Tong began to feel sorry for him. Shin Tingwei said he's a boy so he's not afraid of pain, asking Tong Tong to keep his secret. Tong Tong immediately agreed, learning that Shin Tingwei was going to be a mother. Tong Tong started to envy the child in Shin Tingwei's belly, because Shin Tingwei is so kind, the child will also receive a lot of love. After hearing this, Shin Tingwei was stunned. Speaking of love, since marrying Lianju, life has indeed been well taken care of by him, and in the future, he should also be able to provide a good life for the child. But his subtle attentiveness and consideration, not even Tong Tong at his age could fully appreciate. Would his own baby be able to feel it? At that moment, hearing Tong Tong say he also wanted a mother, but then he immediately retreated under the covers saying he wanted to sleep. Shin Tingwei sighed, "Is Tong Tong going to stay here to sleep?" Then, Tong Tong slowly poked his head out, his eyes brimming with tears, seeking Shin Tingwei's consent. Shin Tingwei gave him a tender kiss, telling him of course he could. Early the next morning, Shin Tingwei woke up to find that Tong Tong had been holding his arm all night. While sleeping, he had unconsciously released pheromones again. Not sure if it would affect anyone here. To be safe, Shin Tingwei decided to open the window to ventilate. At this moment, he heard some noise downstairs. It was Lianju, who was about to go to work. As Lianju was about to get in the car, he suddenly stopped and turned his head to catch Shin Tingwei's gaze from upstairs. The caught Shin Tingwei awkwardly greeted him, and Lianju nodded slightly in response. Watching his car drive away, Shin Tingwei immediately closed the window and took a deep breath to calm himself down. Upon learning that Shin Tingwei was not feeling well, Lianju immediately rushed back from the company. While on the phone with Shin Tingwei, he heard indescribable noises, as he was helping Tong Tong knit a scarf. Shin Tingwei accidentally cut his hand, and Tong Tong immediately came over to care for Wei Wei. "Are you okay?" Shin Tingwei said he was just distracted, but Tong Tong could clearly see that he seemed uncomfortable. His face full of worry, and he looked off all day today, very listless. He almost cut his hand while cooking and there was a sweet smell coming from him. Tong Tong touched his forehead and wanted to call Dad, but Shin Tingwei told him not to bother Lianju. To stop Tong Tong from worrying, Shin Tingwei quickly changed the subject and told him it was the baby being naughty. Then she placed Tong Tong's hand on her belly. "Little baby, be good, otherwise Wei Wei will feel very uncomfortable." Seeing Tong Tong like this, Shin Tingwei was reminded of last night. She could feel that Tong Tong was worried that once Lianju had his own child, he would shift his attention to the newborn baby and no longer pay attention to him. So, Shin Tingwei directly told Tong Tong that even if Dad has a new baby, he will still treat you well. You and the baby in Uncle's belly are both Dad's children. How could Dad not love you? Seeing that Tong Tong feels insecure about Dad's love, Shin Tingwei can only tell him the truth. "Tong Tong, your dad might never have been loved before. So Tong Tong, it's not that your dad doesn't love you, but that he still doesn't know how. Can you give Dad some time and be patient, is that okay?" Now Tong Tong finally understood, and Shin Tingwei's presence also made him feel loved. After saying goodnight, he prepared to go to sleep. After Tong Tong left, Shin Tingwei finally couldn't suppress this feeling any longer. He felt a heat of passion with no relief in sight. Suddenly, he saw Lianju's room and slowly walked inside, feeling extremely restless. Because he received a call from Tongtong, Lianju was already on his way back. Thinking about how I was just in the office earlier when I suddenly received a call from Tongtong, saying that Weiwei seemed to be sick, sweating profusely, and with a flushed face. Upon hearing about the situation, Lianju immediately got up to go home without saying a word, continuously calling Shintingwei on the way, but there was no answer. Thinking about how he was like that when I got home yesterday, could it be that he has gone into the closet again today? Just then, the call connected. Lianju asked him what was wrong, but there were just some indistinct sounds coming from the other end of the line. Lianju adjusted his headset to hear better and gradually seemed to hear Shintingwei's response, but the sound made him freeze on the spot. After pulling over to the roadside, the indescribable noises continued in his earphones. He felt himself growing hot just from listening. Shintingwei, what kind of kink do you have? I think you're not sick, you're in heat. At this point, Shintingwei was already becoming disoriented. He never expected Shintingwei to be so skilled. Lianju was about to lose control, the voice in the headphones made him freeze on the spot, deciding to smoke a cigarette to calm down, but the heat had already crawled through the headphones. This person, still so restless while pregnant, then thought of Shintingwei's expression before. His so-called estrus was nothing more than a euphemistic expression. Think about it, it seems not so euphemistic after all. Lianju reminded Shintingwei to restrain himself as he is still pregnant, but it seemed to have no effect, so in a fit of anger, Lianju hung up the phone, and then returned home to knock on the door. However, there was no response inside. Now, half an hour has passed since the phone call, thinking that Shintingwei should have already gone to bed, and by his voice, he didn't seem to have any physical problems. When he opened the door, he immediately smelled the alcohol. Shintingwei was on the bed, passed out. Lianju was speechless. Isn't that the robe I changed out of this morning? His skills at seduction are getting better. So I called Shintingwei and saw a red spot on the back of his neck. Lianju was puzzled about what it was, curiously touched it, and instantly stimulated Shintingwei. Seeing his reaction, Lianju blushed and turned his head away. Feeling him start to leave, Shintingwei immediately grabbed him. Lianju told him to wake up and go back to his own room, but the next second Shintingwei pounced on him. Muttering about a flavor, Lianju asked him what flavor. Shintingwei whispered in his ear, "I want Lianju's scent." Shintingwei was too much. Lianju was almost unable to resist, constantly stimulated by him. Lianju got a bit angry, gently grabbed his hair and said, "Shintingwei, are you addicted?" But seeing his expression, Lianju's anger immediately disappeared, replaced by extreme shyness. To be safe, Lianju decided to ask Sin, and learning it was okay, Lianju bit directly into his gland. Weird, what are all these bizarre habits of Shintingwei? After ending the night and taking a bath, coming out to see Shintingwei sitting there dazed, looking pitiful. With his hair still wet, I threw a towel at him to dry his hair, but Shintingwei just touched his neck without speaking. I was speechless. I've never seen someone with such a big contrast like him, but he hesitated to move. I grabbed the towel and helped him dry his hair myself. Is your sage mode going to last until your next heat? Shintingwei glanced at me and then silently lowered his head. Then I picked up the hairdryer and vigorously rubbed it against his head. It was done in a few seconds. Seeing Shintingwei still sitting there dazedly, I asked if he was waiting for me to carry him to bed. The next second, Shintingwei obediently went to bed by himself, originally going to sleep quietly. Suddenly, Lianju heard some noises. Next to him, Shintingwei was looking at him. Did you mark me? Lianju didn't understand what he meant. He just saw Shintingwei blush and touch his neck. You just bit my neck. Thinking that Lianju doesn't have pheromones, but the bite indeed alleviated the heat of estrus. Could hormones also be injected? Lianju was puzzled. What's wrong with biting his neck? At this moment, Shintingwei was acting like a child, poking the pillow with his finger. I think you've marked me. Hearing this, Lianju was completely speechless, making him visit the internet less. Shintingwei didn't understand what he meant. Lianju told him to tone down the cheesy lines. Shintingwei was confused, just about to ask something more when Lianju pulled the covers over him, covering his eyes and saying, "Shut up and go to sleep." Meanwhile, news had spread that Lianju had gotten someone pregnant. Yu Man hurried over to listen to the gossip. The next day, sunlight streamed into the room. Shintingwei slowly opened his eyes, not knowing the time, only feeling a pain in his waist. At this moment, Lianju noticed that he was awake, grabbed him directly, leaned close to his ear, and told him not to move, making Shintingwei's face turn red early in the morning. At this moment, Shintingwei's body was stiff, slowly moving his body. Seeing him like this, Lianju didn't insist. When getting up to turn on the light, he specifically told Shintingwei, who was sneaking peeks at Lianju next to him, hesitating whether to say good morning to him or not. At this time, Lianju got out of bed and was about to change clothes when he turned his head and met Shintingwei's gaze. Shintingwei tried to feign sleep again, but Lianju directly exposed him and told him it was still early. Continuing to sleep, Shen Tingwei felt so embarrassed that he quickly curled up into a ball and only dared to poke his head out after hearing Lianju leave. Then he moved to Lianju's spot and took a good lazy sleep. As soon as Lianju came out, he saw Tong Tong sneaking around at the door of Shen Tingwei's room. Suddenly hearing his dad's voice, Tong Tong was startled. "Tell Dad that he just came to see if Wei Wei is feeling a little better." Lianju immediately thought of Shen Tingwei's condition just now. "Tell Tong Tong he's okay. Then remind him to put on his shoes properly." Suddenly, Tong Tong stopped Lianju. Hearing him mention Aunt Lu's situation, originally thinking of finding an opportunity to talk to Tong Tong about dismissing the nanny, he didn't expect that he would bring it up himself now. Tong Tong asked Dad if he could help Aunt Lu find another job. Lianju didn't understand why he liked Aunt Lu so much. After hearing Tong Tong's reasons, it turns out he was afraid that Shen Tingwei would be bullied. It seems Shen Tingwei knows how to get along with Tong Tong better than himself. Since Tong Tong said so, Lianju agreed. Suddenly someone came looking for him while he was at work. The receptionist was puzzled if she had an appointment. The woman laughed. "Do I need an appointment to see my own son?" The assistant went to the office to find Lianju and told him Mrs. Chen had arrived. Looking at the current company, it was incomparable to the company Lianju used to work for. However, he managed to establish a new business in China just a few months after leaving Fingjue, which shows he is very capable. As soon as Lianju came over, Yuman smelled a strong scent of alcohol. "Are you drinking alcohol in the office?" Lianju felt a bit guilty after hearing this because the smell was actually coming from Shen Tingwei. Therefore, he quickly changed the subject. "You came to see me. Does Chen Shulian know?" Yuman told him that since he left Fingjue, Chen Shulian has been busy and now has no time to care about himself. And this time he came because he heard that he got someone pregnant, and when she heard this, Lianju just stared at her. Yuman quickly explained that she was not investigating him. Hearing the subtext in her words, Lianju immediately guessed that Chen Shulian was surveilling behind the scenes. Then, Yuman handed over her phone, showing photos of the doctor going in and out of his house, and photos of Xinting not working. Yuman wondered if Lianju was having financial difficulties. With so many mistresses gathered together, he wasn't afraid of a disaster at home. Lianju was speechless, surprised by her nosiness. Yuman explained that she came this time also because she saw he was very sad about the pregnancy, so she came to remind him to be careful. Before leaving, she asked him to keep Chen Su for a while, as that guy has been visiting the Chen family more frequently since you left. "I reckon that guy is harboring bad intentions, just looking for a place to cause trouble." He was just bitten by Lianju. Xinting immediately beamed. Lianju went to the clothing store to help Xinting pick out clothes, and the shop assistant made Lianju awkward with a casual question. At that moment, he remembered Shen Tingwei telling him earlier that the clothes were not suitable and asked Lianju if there was something for pregnancy wear. Before he could finish, Lianju quickly agreed to help him buy it while being introduced by the salesperson. While at it, Lianju received a message from Shen Tingwei, thinking it was something urgent. He was a bit unable to see the rest of the message and paused, wondering why it felt so similar to before. Could it be that he was in heat again? Thinking that Shen Tingwei was always a measured person, but after yesterday, Lianju couldn't help but doubt whether he really had an addiction. At that moment, the salesperson brought over a design, and Lianju asked if there was something lighter and softer, something that felt unrestricted when worn. Upon hearing this, the salesperson instantly understood they had it. Over here, the main feature is the close-fitting, unnoticeable feel, with soft, skin-friendly fabric and also a very. Before he could finish, Lianju directly asked him to pack everything. The assistant saw what Lianju bought and instantly blushed, surprised that President Lian went so big. After returning home, Lianju sent Tong Tong away first. Then, they came to the room. As soon as they entered, Shen Tingwei pounced. Lianju reminded him to slow down. Shen Tingwei kept rubbing against him, and I couldn't help but apologize. Seeing that Shen Tingwei couldn't untie his tie after a long time, Lianju was speechless. "Why are you so clumsy? I have to do it myself." Then, he yanked off the tie. Unexpectedly, Shen Tingwei was so adept. Lianju was worried that standing like that might strain his body, but Shen Tingwei said there was no need. He slowly lifted the hair on his neck, asking Lianju to remark him with a bite. Looking at the red spot, Lianju bit down as instructed. After a while, Shen Tingwei returned to his usual self. "Thanks, I'm good now." Then, he turned and left, leaving Lianju standing there. Suddenly, he noticed something was off and asked Lianju if he was hungry and wanted some porridge. Lianju was somewhat angry. "Shen Tingwei, what madness is this again?" Shen Tingwei touched his neck. "I don't know either. I just really need you." Hearing this, countless memories flashed through Lianju's mind. From childhood, when Chen Shu needed him to take tests, to the contracts that needed his signature at work, and now Shintingwei's I need you. Shintingwei apologized for the trouble he had caused him. Looking up, Lianju had already approached him. His chin was lifted, and he was greeted with a kiss. This kiss felt very different. There had been kisses before, but most were in bed. The feeling now reminded him of their wedding day in the church, when they exchanged rings. Back then, Lianju bent down to kiss him. It was only a few seconds, but oddly focused. His heartbeat now was as fast as it was then. After it ended, both of them felt awkward and didn't know what to say. Lianju then picked up the topic from before. Didn't we say we were going to have a meal? Only then did Shintingwei react, quickly turning around to leave and even turned off the light. Lianju stood still, stunned. After a while, Shintingwei came back, turned on the light and said, "Sorry, I forgot there was someone else in the room." Seeing the clothes Lianju bought for him, Shintingwei was mortified. When it was time for dinner, Tongtong hurriedly called Dad over and considerately prepared porridge. The first bowl was for Weiwei, and then for Dad. Seeing them like this, Lianju felt jealous. He asked Shintingwei when the checkup was tomorrow. Learning it was at 8 a.m., he suddenly thought of those photos. He thought if Chen Shulian had someone take those photos, it would be relatively okay. Knowing Chen Shulian, although he is ruthless, he rarely takes his anger out on others. But if it was Chen Su who had someone take those photos to give to Chen Shulian, then it's another story. After all, he is capable of doing anything. For safety, Lianju decided to accompany Shintingwei tomorrow. Shintingwei was a bit at a loss upon hearing this but still agreed. Lianju seems a bit odd today, and so was that kiss earlier. Seeing Shintingwei constantly looking at him, Lianju, puzzled, could only bring up a random topic. The porridge isn't bad. Hearing him say this, Shintingwei felt even more that he was being strange today. After finishing the meal, Shintingwei kept himself busy knitting a towel. After dinner, the downstairs became quiet. Tongtong was busy with online classes, and Lianju was busy with work, feeling like the only idle one around. At this moment, seeing a little cat come over finally gave him some company. He suddenly remembered he hadn't shown the cat to his colleagues and immediately sent them a photo of the cat. Right after, he received a call from a colleague. When asked why he got a cat, Shintingwei was taken aback. He quietly told his colleague that the cat belonged to his partner. The colleague didn't care much and directly asked, "Is your husband's matter resolved? I didn't want to disturb you lately as I feared you might be upset." Hearing this title, Shintingwei felt embarrassed when talking about the child. The colleague immediately guessed it was me who came to the amusement park last time. I remember he seemed to call Miss Chen wait a moment and then noticed Lianju coming over. At this moment, Shintingwei noticed Lianju coming over with a cup, indicating he wanted to pour some water. Currently, Shintingwei was still on the phone and a bit flustered. While the call had exploded with the shocked and loud exclamations of a colleague, even Lianju standing beside could hear it. Shintingwei immediately hung up the phone. The scene went quiet, fearing Lianju would overthink. Shintingwei quickly explained. But Lianju put down the cup heavily, turned around, and left, leaving behind the words, "I've never been married." At this moment, a message arrived on the phone. A colleague specially reminded him to ask clearly, not to be deceived. Shintingwei hurriedly got up to catch up with Lianju, listening to Shintingwei's apology. Lianju also wanted to know if he really cared about having been married, seeing Shintingwei's hesitance. Lianju no longer spoke with him, turning to enter the room, but Shintingwei held on to him. "I didn't care whether you were married or had children, and Tongtong is very well behaved. I like him a lot." But Lianju didn't answer and just released his hand. After a short while, he came out and handed Shintingwei a bag. Just as Shintingwei was about to ask what it was, the door of the room slammed shut. It seemed not to be just ordinary clothes. The mere packaging made Shintingwei blush with embarrassment as he opened it with a nervous heart. The clothes inside instantly made his hormones surge. My God, is this what pregnant people wear in this world? Unexpectedly, I had only mentioned this matter to Lianju earlier, and he actually remembered it and went to buy this specially. Maybe I'll try it on after taking a bath later. Upon learning that Shintingwei's previous blind date was with a man, Lianju became even angrier, looking at the contract he had Shintingwei sign. Lianju sighed helplessly. It seems Shintingwei had previously gone on a trip with that woman he just talked to on the phone. Although he knew he could accept women, when he first met him, he said that the marriage conditions were to not interfere with each other. Shintingwei indeed did well in this regard, but thinking about how polite and distant he usually is towards him, yet talks so vividly with that woman, made him very angry. At this moment, he heard a knock on the door. Opening it, he saw Shintingwei with his hair still wet. Lianju wondered why he was there. Shintingwei, blushing, told Lianju that the clothes he bought earlier didn't fit well and kept coming undone. He wanted him to help. Suddenly hearing the sound of a door opening, Lianju pulled Shintingwei inside and closed the door. Tongtong came out with a puzzled look, asking what the noise outside was. Inside Lian Zhu's room, Shen Tingwei asked him to help see why the clothes wouldn't fasten. Looking at the clothes, Lian Zhu could hardly believe it. It seemed the sales clerk misunderstood the meaning. Lian Zhu slowly helped him button up the clothes. Just as Shen Tingwei turned his head to thank him, "We're about to welcome a kiss." I must say, Lian Zhu looks very refined with glasses on. Seeing Shen Tingwei like this, Lian Zhu chuckled. Looking like this and still wanting to find a woman, Shen Tingwei was completely baffled and didn't understand what he was talking about. Lian Zhu was very curious about what kind of person would be matched with him for a blind date. Lian Zhu suddenly became furious, meaning it was with a man. The more he thought about it, the angrier he got and directly bit him. "Is this how much you want a man? So much so you'd go on a blind date with one?" Waking up, I no longer knew the time. Turning my head, I saw Lian Zhu. Unexpectedly, even his sleeping appearance was so attractive. Shen Tingwei felt too shy to look even a second longer, his face blushing. Thinking back to yesterday, I felt so shy, as if I was doing something naughty in front of a baby. At this moment, I touched my stomach and felt like the baby was moving. Hearing the sound, Lian Zhu, who was behind me, also woke up. Feeling groggy, Shen Tingwei greeted him good morning and clapped his hands, telling him it was time to get up. After a while, Shen Tingwei got up first, hesitating whether to wear this piece of clothing or not. Lian Zhu watched as if enjoying a show. "Aren't we going to the hospital in a bit? Or do you want the doctor to see you wearing that?" Hearing this, Shen Tingwei blushed and shook his head vigorously, then hurriedly scampered back to his room. Lian Zhu was amused by his reaction, looking like he was in a vulnerable phase. Shen Tingwei prepared to give him a loving hug and wore a high collar specifically to cover any marks. Feeling sleepy from waking up too early, Lian Zhu told him he could sleep a bit longer. Thus, Shen Tingwei comfortably leaned to one side, ready to nap, and in his drowsiness heard Lian Zhu softly making a phone call. Thinking about how he was also dealing with work during breakfast today, it seems he is very busy today. But even so, he still came to accompany me. At this moment, the assistant noticed a car following them and immediately informed Lian Zhu. "It looks like someone Chen Su sent. I wonder what he wants to do. Did he sense something unusual about Shen Tingwei? Does he want to take some photos to use as leverage? Anyway, we should lose them first." Seeing Shen Tingwei still sleeping beside him, Lian Zhu directly pulled him over to lean against his own shoulder and then reminded the assistant to drive steadily. After a while, they arrived at the hospital entrance. Shen Tingwei opened his eyes and found himself leaning on Lian Zhu again. He immediately sat up straight obediently. Is he not angry this time? After getting out of the car, Shen Tingwei quickly called to Lian Zhu. Seeing him constantly circling around him asking questions, Lian Zhu was speechless. Noticing he wasn't saying anything, Shen Tingwei reached out and touched his forehead, asking if he was feeling unwell. But Lian Zhu blocked him and said he was fine and should go inside. Lian Zhu's behavior was obviously off. Shen Tingwei suddenly remembered that the biology textbook mentioned that after an alpha's initial marking, they are likely to enter a susceptible period. During this time, their demand for omega's pheromones increases, leading to clinginess or mood changes and other susceptible reactions. Reflecting on Lian Zhu's behavior in the past 2 days, it matched what the textbook described. Could he really be entering the susceptible period? Hearing Shen Tingwei hesitate like he had something to say, Lian Zhu stopped and asked him directly what he wanted to say. Turning around, he saw Shen Tingwei opening his arms to him. "Do you want me to hug you?" The atmosphere instantly became quiet. Lian Zhu was about to refute, but Shen Tingwei asked again, leaving Lian Zhu momentarily speechless. He directly embraced Shen Tingwei, although it looked a bit stiff. Shen Tingwei comforted him like a child, patting Lian Zhu's back and thinking about releasing some pheromones to perhaps calm him down. Then Lian Zhu smelled the alcohol. He was already nauseous from motion sickness, and the smell made him feel even more dizzy and bloated. Shen Tingwei asked if he felt better, but Lian Zhu didn't understand what he was saying because Shen Tingwei had noticed earlier that he seemed uncomfortable. So, he touched his forehead again, noticing his complexion seemed even worse. Could it be because he is not an alpha and it's his sensitive period, so he's not adapting well to the strong pheromones? So he quickly let go of Lian Zhu and covered the glands on the back of his neck. "Is it my scent that's making you uncomfortable? Is it my scent that makes you uncomfortable?" At this moment, Shen Tingwei looked like a child who had made a mistake, retreating further and further away. Lian Zhu sighed helplessly and grabbed his hand. "It's time for a checkup." Shen Tingwei's face turned red instantly. Holding onto Lian Zhu's hand tightly, they went to see the doctor. After the doctor's examination, Lian Zhu picked up the examination results and was about to take Shen Tingwei home. The two didn't speak a word in the car, but Lian Zhu kept holding Shen Tingwei's hand. At the doorstep, Lian Zhu asked the assistant to wait in the car. After entering, he went straight upstairs. Shen Tingwei followed behind, thinking about how Lianju had held his hand all the way. His heartbeat started to speed up. He told himself, this is just an abnormal behavior during the sensitive period. I need to stay calm. Shin Tingwei's actions made Lianju feel like he was a pet dog he was raising. Lianju, dressed neatly, went downstairs. It looks like he's about to go to work. Shin Tingwei hurriedly asked him if he wouldn't stay for lunch. Hearing his refusal, Shin Tingwei immediately felt disappointed. Even Lianxia wondered why he became so clingy today. So, he called him over and directly pulled him into his arms. Don't wait for me for dinner. Shin Tingwei blushed and responded, as Lianxia turned around and sniffed his sleeve. Shin Tingwei, seeing this, was puzzled, thinking although Lianxia didn't like the scent on him, it seemed that some pheromone comfort was still needed. In fact, Lianxia was just checking for any smell of alcohol. That night, Shin Tingwei sat in the living room knitting a scarf. Then, hearing some noise, he turned his head and saw Lianxia returning from work, wondering why he was still not sleeping so late. Shin Tingwei just looked up at him, not feeling sleepy, just waiting for you a moment. Hearing him say that, Lianju was so stunned that he let him go to sleep quickly. In the afternoon, Shin Tingwei thought of a way to help Lianju ease his sensitive period. So he wanted to try it out. While Lianju was taking a bath, Shin Tingwei hurried to his own room. He picked up a bunch of his usual items which had pheromones but with a very faint scent, thinking it shouldn't cause Lianju to feel repulsion or discomfort. He thought that these clothes carrying his scent would comfort Lianju during his sensitive period. After a while, Lianju came out after his bath. Seeing Shin Tingwei placing clothes on his bed, he was utterly baffled. What are you doing? Shin Tingwei turned around a bit awkwardly. There's my scent on the bed. Maybe this will make you feel more comfortable. After hearing this, Lianju was completely stunned. This behavior, how much it resembled a dog sneakily hiding its owner's clothes in its nest. Then he recalled Shin Tingwei's earlier mention of marking. Shin Tingwei, am I a dog you've raised? Shin Tingwei looked at him with a confused expression. What dog nonsense are you talking about? Lianju was so angry that he said, take these messy things away. Upon careful thought, it seemed true. After all, their relationship was just contractual. Doing something like nest building for a partner indeed seemed inappropriate. So Shin Tingwei quickly packed up his things. Seeing him like this, Lianju wondered why he wasn't even defending himself. Shin Tingwei neatly packed his things and then silently prepared to return to his room. The next second, Lianju called out to him, where are you going? Without looking back, Shin Tingwei said, to my room. Just as he was about to open the door, Lianju slammed his hand against it. The clothes in Shin Tingwei's hand fell to the ground. Mr. Lian, is something the matter? Hearing his voice, it seemed like he was crying. Lianju told him to turn around. Shin Tingwei quickly wiped away his tears and slowly turned. Seeing him like this, Lianju was exasperated. Did I upset you today? Just because I didn't let you hug enough? Shin Tingwei quickly said no. Lianju explained that he didn't find the smell on him unpleasant, it was the assistant's poor driving skills that caused his motion sickness. Shin Tingwei suddenly realized, and even Lianju was speechless. How could you overthink so much? Indeed, Lianju doesn't have a secondary gender. How could he show symptoms of a sensitive period? It was just motion sickness. Why do I overthink so much? Feeling utterly embarrassed, Shin Tingwei quickly wanted to escape, but Lianju was holding the door shut. Shin Tingwei asked for his permission to open the door, saying he wanted to sleep. Lianju told him not to be mad, and just as Shin Tingwei was about to say he wasn't, the next second, he was met with a kiss, and Lianju locked the door from the inside. On the day of Qixi, Lianju specially picked a bouquet of roses for Shin Tingwei, but what he received was Shin Tingwei's vomiting reaction. Waking up the next day and reaching out, he found that Lianju had already gotten up. Recalling last night, Lianju simply stayed to sleep. Although last night's speculation about his susceptible period was overturned, his recent series of abnormal behaviors still puzzled Shin Tingwei. It couldn't possibly be that he likes me, could it? Thinking back to how Lianju was resistant and distant from the start, and was even suspected of having ulterior motives for approaching him, in many ways, they have always been worlds apart. I also don't think that just making him a few meals, or having a child, could make him develop feelings for me beyond his sense of duty. After getting up and tying Tong Tong's tie, he's off to school. After Tong Tong started school, only Shin Tingwei was left at home. It felt somewhat unfamiliar. He picked up the calendar and saw that today was Qixi Festival. In Lianju's office, his assistant tells him today is Qixi Festival. Lianju doesn't see the point, asking what this has to do with tonight's meeting. The assistant looks at him seriously, don't you need to go home early to accompany Mr. Shin? In fact, the assistant himself wants to leave work early today to complete the Qixi tasks in an online game. Lianju thinks it over. Lin Chen has been by my side for so many years, he knows well that I don't care about meaningless holidays like Qixi or Valentine's Day. But today, he specifically mentioned it and even wanted to postpone tonight's meeting. Could it be that Shen Tingwei thought of Qixi festival but was too embarrassed to tell me? So he had Lin Chen speak for him? It seems quite possible, so I agreed to push the meeting to tomorrow and go back. Passing by a flower shop, Lianju quickly asked his assistant to stop the car and went inside. Seeing someone carrying a bouquet of roses, thinking of how Shen Tingwei waited for him until very late last night and was sulking, since he looks forward to this festival so much, buying him a bouquet of flowers should make him very happy. So, when the shop assistant asked what he needed, Lianju told her to bring a bouquet of roses. This was the first time Lianju bought flowers for someone. It felt a bit nervous. Shen Tingwei heard some noise, turned his head, just about to ask Lianju why he came back so early today, then saw him holding a bouquet of roses. Shen Tingwei was instantly stunned. Lianju told him he came back early because he was free today. Seeing Shen Tingwei's reaction seemed a bit off. Lianju wondered what was wrong with him. The next second, Shen Tingwei stood up and ran to the bathroom to vomit. He rushed to the bathroom. The smell of roses reminded him of the alpha from the previous blind date. Just thinking about it made him want to throw up. He quickly washed his face to calm down, comforting himself that everything was over, whether it was the rose-scented pheromones or the car accident. Whether it's the rose-scented pheromones or that car accident. By the time he had finished tidying up, Lianju was no longer in the living room, and the roses on the table had disappeared. Turning his head, he saw the flowers had been thrown into the trash can. Shen Tingwei hesitantly picked up the flowers, thinking about his own reaction just now. It must have made Lianju very angry, right? But why did he want to give me flowers? Looking at these somewhat wilted roses, Shen Tingwei trimmed them and placed them in a vase, then put it in the most conspicuous place, and tidied up the details again. This way, when Lianju comes downstairs and sees it, he probably won't be so angry anymore. Thinking about making some of his favorite dishes for dinner later as a return gift for the roses, he went to Lianju's room and knocked on the door. After the door opened, Lianju leaned against the wall with an unhappy face. Shen Tingwei was somewhat at a loss. Dinner was almost ready. In another 10 minutes, they could start eating. Lianju just responded indifferently with a hum. Then, Shen Tingwei brought up the roses he had just mentioned. Before he could express his liking, Lianju said they were prepared by Lin Chen. After hearing this, Shen Tingwei silently lowered his head. It turned out that it wasn't Lianju who had sent the flowers. To clear up the misunderstanding with Lianju, Shen Tingwei decided to take the initiative. Hearing that the flowers weren't from Lianju, Shen Tingwei felt utterly dejected. Thinking back to the dinner table, he had intended to explain his earlier behavior to Lianju. But seeing his indifferent demeanor, who seemed uninterested in conversing and had left for upstairs after eating very little, even seeing the neatly arranged roses didn't bring a happy expression on his face. But then again, since the flowers were sent by an assistant, perhaps Lianju wouldn't care about how they were handled. Still, he felt he should thank the assistant. So, Shen Tingwei quickly sent a message to the assistant. Alone and bored, he turned on the TV. The Qixi Festival Gala was being broadcasted, as introduced by the host. Learning that the Qixi Festival is a traditional event in this world, I then received a reply from my assistant, seeing him send a question mark. Shen Tingwei also didn't understand what it meant. Following that, Cha sent a piece of text, just as the TV was introducing, that the Qixi Festival is known as the traditional Valentine's Day. Now Shen Tingwei understood. It turns out Lianju sent flowers because today is Valentine's Day. When he looked at his phone again, the assistant had already retracted the previous message. Looking at the text he edited back and forth, Shen Tingwei could feel the assistant's struggle and hesitation through the screen. Now that everything was clear, Shen Tingwei decided to clarify things with Lianju. While knocking on the door, he rehearsed in his mind how to speak to Lianju. But when the door opened, his mind went blank. Lianju was totally confused, watching him stammer for a long time without being able to say anything. Lianju started to get irritated, turned around to enter the room, and that's when Shen Tingwei quickly called out to him. Blushing slightly, I said, I'm a bit sensitive to roses. I have some bad memories from the past and don't like the smell, but I'm very happy. I really like the flowers you gave me. Next time, could you give me jasmine instead? After hearing this somewhat awkward statement, Lianju was stunned on the spot. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. At this point, Shen Tingwei stepped forward and gave him a kiss. Can you give me jasmine tomorrow? Lianju blushed from embarrassment and asked if Shen Tingwei liked jasmine. Shen Tingwei softly replied and tentatively touched Lianju's hand. Lianju immediately grabbed it and pulled him into the room. At such a close distance, they could hear each other's heartbeats. Seeing Shen Tingwei close his eyes, Lianzhu immediately guessed his intention. He wondered what expression Shen Tingwei would show if he didn't kiss him. After waiting for a while without any movement, Shen Tingwei opened his eyes, looking confused. It seems I've been tricked by Lianzhu. I still have to face the challenge myself. Seeing Shen Tingwei like this, Lianzhu thought he was in heat again. Shen Tingwei very seriously told him he wasn't. Even though the documents on the table had fallen to the ground, Lianzhu kept staring at him without blinking. When he woke up the next day, it was already past 10 o'clock. At this moment, he suddenly noticed something beside him. It was blooming jasmine flowers. Being able to see his favorite jasmine flowers as soon as he got up made him feel good all day. Since they cleared the air last time, his relationship with Lianzhu had become more and more harmonious. The next day, as soon as Shen Tingwei got up, he saw his favorite jasmine flowers on the bedside. He reached out to gently touch them and suddenly thought of Lianzhu. Startled, he shyly withdrew his hand immediately. At this moment, Lianzhu called. Shen Tingwei, who now felt like he had been caught doing something bad, answered the phone in a panic. Then came Lianzhu's gentle voice telling Shen Tingwei that because the flower shop didn't have jasmine bouquets, he could only get potted plants. Actually, just seeing the jasmine flowers made Shen Tingwei very happy. Hearing Shen Tingwei say thank you, Lianzhu quickly made an excuse, saying that he just happened to pass by the flower shop on his way to the company and bought it because he heard Shen liked it. To avoid exposing Lianzhu, Shen Tingwei quickly held back his laughter, saying he would come back early for dinner tonight. After saying that, he immediately hung up, still not saying goodbye to anyone like before. But now, Shen Tingwei could understand Lianzhu. In the past, he would have just thought Lianzhu was very rude. Thinking about it now, Lianzhu was adorably awkward. If Lianzhu knew Shen Tingwei was describing him as cute behind his back, he would probably throw a tantrum, like hiding in the study smoking or something because Shen was thinking about him. At this moment, Lianzhu, who was far away at the company, sneezed. His assistant thought he caught a cold. Shen Tingwei happily took a picture of the jasmine flowers and posted it on social media. Feeling delighted inside, soon after I received a like notification, it turned out to be from Chang Kaisen. I wanted to reply that it was a gift from my partner, but after thinking, I changed it to husband. Sending it out, I felt so embarrassed. The next second, I received a call from Chang Kaisen saying, "Goodness, I was just showing concern and you mock me?" Shen Tingwei quickly explained, but in Chang Kaisen's view, it all seemed like flaunting love. However, it was evident that Shen Tingwei had a good Qixi festival, acting like a catalyst for peace in his and Lianzhu's life. Many things were quietly changing. At that moment, the assistant skiving in the pantry, upon seeing Shen Tingwei's post, subconsciously liked it. Suddenly, he realized it might be inappropriate to like it before his boss, Lian, did. He quickly unliked it but thought Lian wouldn't mind such a trivial matter, so he liked it again. Still, he feared Lian would deduce his skiving from the timing of the like, leading him to repeatedly toggle between liking and unliking. This action left Shen Tingwei utterly baffled, as well as Lianzhu afterwards. Gradually, she began to learn to take care of Shen Tingwei. Seeing him accidentally injured, she would considerately step forward to help him treat the wound. He thoughtfully went up to help him treat his wound. When Mu Chang was cooking, Shen Tingwei would let Lianzhu taste the food, to judge whether he liked it or not. During National Day, Tong Tong came back from vacation. A happy family life. Shen Tingwei heard the sound of water in a daze. It seemed that Lianzhu was taking a shower. He picked up his phone and saw it was past 6 in the morning. Seeing the date instantly woke him up. Today was his birthday. Though he didn't know what he was expecting. At this moment, Lianzhu came out after taking a shower. Thinking Shen Tingwei was still asleep, he walked lightly. Seeing Shen Tingwei suddenly peek out, Lianzhu was a bit surprised. Shen Tingwei thought he was leaving so early today. Lianzhu told him he wasn't. As he opened the curtains, his hair was still wet. Shen Tingwei worried he might catch a cold and suggested blow-drying his hair. Lianzhu immediately agreed. While blow-drying Lianzhu's hair, Shen Tingwei discussed with him about making 2 boiled eggs and adding a grilled sausage for Tongtong's monthly exam today to bring good luck. Lianzhu just thought he was being superstitious. But Shen Tingwei believed it was to wish for good fortune, then messed up his hair. Lianzhu didn't say much, feeling almost dizzy from his antics. As the weather turned colder, Shen Tingwei put on the scarf he had knitted for Tongtong, which seemed a bit too large. Tongtong was so happy, quickly saying it wasn't too big but just right. Seeing this, Lianzhu also said it was just right. Hearing his dad agree with him, Tongtong blushed instantly. Shen Tingwei then took the school bag, helping him put it on, saying it was time to leave for the monthly exam. "You'll do great," Tongtong confidently replied, "no problem, after all, he had the special breakfast prepared by Weiwei." On Shen Tingwei's birthday, he was full of anticipation, finally waiting for Lianzhu to come back. Unexpectedly, he ended up getting scolded. In previous years, his parents and friends would prepare surprises for his birthday, gradually making him look forward to it every year. During the wish-making moment, Shintingwei's wishes were always for his family to be safe and for happiness and harmony. His friends thought it was time for him to make a new wish. Mom also echoed along, wishing to find someone she likes. Shintingwei immediately blushed, having wished for peace and harmony every year for the past 20 or so years. She always felt that she was lucky because her birthday wishes came true every year. As time passed, she got everything she wanted, but now, the peace and family she wished for are gone. She didn't snap back to reality until after greeting Tong Tong. Though her former family is gone, she now has a new family to spend her birthday with. At this moment, she saw Lian Zhu getting up, seemingly heading to the office. Shintingwei quickly went up to help him straighten his clothes. Are you busy today? Lian Zhu paused for a moment before telling her he wasn't. Hearing this, Shintingwei smiled happily, then I'll wait for you to come back for dinner. Lian Zhu looked at him, puzzled, while the assistant's memo already had Shintingwei's birthday noted down. Thinking of reminding Director Lian later. Previously, because he forgot Miss Chen's birthday, she complained for a long time. To avoid such a situation again, he just entered Director Lian's office. At that moment, Lian Zhu's phone rang. Lian Zhu motioned to his assistant not to speak first. He smiled after answering the call. Moreover, the conversation seemed to get happier towards the end, and they even set a location. Seeing this, the assistant figured that Mr. Lian must have arranged to meet Mr. Shin, so he didn't need to say anything more. After hanging up, Lian Zhu asked the assistant what he wanted to say. At home, Shintingwei was happily humming a tune while making a cake when Tong Tong returned. Upon entering, Tong Tong saw Wei Wei making a cake. Shintingwei happily invited him to eat. Seeing that it was his favorite cream cake, Tong Tong's eyes lit up. Shintingwei told him it was an early celebration for the end of his monthly exams. In fact, Shintingwei also made a less sweet chiffon cake for the evening to share with Lian Zhu. After all, birthday wishes are precious because they can only be made once a year. She wanted to save the precious wishing time for the evening, when Lian Zhu was around. Looking at the time, she had no idea when Lian Zhu would return. Dinner was with Tong Tong. By around 9, Tong Tong had already gone to sleep. Yet, Shintingwei was still waiting for Lian Zhu to come back in the living room. By after 10 o'clock, Shintingwei was getting sleepy. Another hour passed, and Lian Zhu still hadn't returned. So, Shintingwei sent him a message, then leaned on the table and continued to wait slowly. Thinking, fortunately, she made a chiffon cake, which didn't use cream. If the cream had melted, it wouldn't look nice. Just then, she heard someone calling her. Shintingwei rubbed her eyes and looked up. In front of her was a chocolate cake, with Lian Zhu beside it, looking at her tenderly. Happy birthday! Make a wish. Shintingwei smiled happily. Suddenly, a door-closing sound woke him up from his sleep. It turned out he had just fallen asleep and finally waited for Lian Zhu to come back from work. Shintingwei happily went forward to greet him. Lian Zhu was a bit surprised. It's so late, and he still hasn't slept. The doctor had previously instructed him to rest well. Lian Zhu was a bit angry. He stared at Shintingwei very seriously. What time is it and you're still not sleeping? Shintingwei was stunned. He turned and looked at the time. It was already past midnight. Thinking back on the scene just now, it turned out to be a dream. And his birthday had already ended. Because Lian Zhu was always so fierce. This time Shintingwei didn't plan to help him dry his hair. Finally, he waited for Lian Zhu to come back from work. Shintingwei was not happy to go up to greet him, but ended up being scolded by him. Shintingwei was a bit scared. But still trying to appear calm, he asked, were you very busy today? You came back so late. Lian Zhu did not answer his question, but instead looked displeased and stared at him, asking what time it was. Shintingwei stammered a soft reply, 1:20. Then he faced Lian Zhu's questioning, don't you know about your own body? What did the doctor say? Shintingwei trembled all over from the scolding. Seeing him not speaking, Lian Zhu gradually calmed down and asked if he was waiting for him to look up. Shintingwei quickly wiped away his tears and told Lian Zhu that he had just accidentally fallen asleep. Seeing him like this, Lian Zhu was somewhat surprised. Again with this aggrieved appearance, he told him to go upstairs to rest early next time if he felt sleepy. Then he reached out to wipe away his tears, saying, you even cry in your sleep. Shintingwei resisted and quickly dodged away. But then Lian Zhu gave him a pat on the head, go upstairs to sleep. When lying in bed, he could still see Lian Zhu making a phone call. And when he hung up the phone, he actually said goodbye. It turns out he can also say goodbye. At this moment, Lian Zhu came over and asked him what he was looking at. It's strange why he buried his head in the blanket. Shin Tingwei shook his head and told him that he was just sleepy. Lianju reached out and stroked his hair. Lianju reached out to caress his hair, then kissed him on the forehead. Shin Tingwei suddenly widened his eyes. This scene seemed so much like the dream he had earlier. Noticing water droplets falling, it seemed he hadn't dried his hair. Shin Tingwei turned his head away, annoyed, deciding not to help him dry his hair this time. He then mentioned that yesterday was his birthday. It felt a bit regretful that he didn't make a wish this year. He woke up the next day coughing, probably because he caught a cold after falling asleep in the restaurant last night. At that moment, Lianju considerately handed him a glass of water and saw that he was already neatly dressed. Shin Tingwei asked if he was going to the office. Lianju told him he was leaving for a business trip. Seeing tears welling up in Shin Tingwei's eyes, Lianju was taken aback. Thinking he had cried because of a dream, suddenly Shin Tingwei realized Lianju was leaving for a business trip. He asked if he was leaving right now and why he hadn't mentioned it yesterday. He hurriedly inquired if Lianju had packed his luggage and eaten breakfast. Speaking too hurriedly started coughing again, Lianju sat down to comfort him. Saw you were tired yesterday and didn't get to tell you. Don't wait for me if it's too late. Shin Tingwei was silent for a while, then told him it won't happen again. Regarding breakfast, Lianju said the assistant has already delivered it, no need to worry, seeing him struggling to wear his watch for a long time. Shin Tingwei reached out and touched him. Lianju immediately understood his meaning. Shin Tingwei asked how long he would be gone, if he could make it back in time for Tongtong's parent-teacher conference. He did well on this month's test, surely he is looking forward to his attendance. Shin Tingwei's dazed appearance made Lianju stunned. He quickly came back to his senses, telling him it would take 3 to 4 days for the parent-teacher conference, probably won't make it, but will try to come back as soon as possible. So, Shin Tingwei hopes that after he returns, he must praise Tongtong more. Children can't always be criticized, they also need to be properly praised. Lianju gently stroked Shin Tingwei's reddening eye corners, noticed his hair has grown. Shin Tingwei thought he could get a haircut in a few months, but Lianju said to wait until he comes back to help him cut it. Shin Tingwei could hardly believe his ears and happily agreed. Seeing Shin Tingwei finally smile, Lianju breathed a sigh of relief. As they were about to depart, the assistant reminded Lianju that today was Mr. Shin's prenatal checkup day and asked if they should arrange a driver for safety. Lianju originally thought he would accompany him after he came back, but then he glanced back at Shin Tingwei. Thinking that the person they sent to monitor said Shin Su had been on a cruise participating in activities these past few days and would likely not take any action soon, he felt it would be good for Shin Tingwei to visit the hospital earlier. So he asked the assistant to arrange it, suggesting a full health checkup as well. Before leaving, Lianju didn't forget to ask Shin Tingwei to send him the checkup report later. Watching the car drive away, Shin Tingwei felt a bit lost. Previously, no matter how busy Lianju was, he would always accompany him to the hospital. Suddenly having to go for the prenatal checkup alone felt a bit unfamiliar. Moreover, he didn't even get to hear him say goodbye. At the moment he answered the phone, Shin Tingwei never expected that Lianju actually came to apologize to him. On the way to the airport, the assistant prepared to show Lianju the itinerary. Wanting to return as soon as possible, Lianju asked his assistant to cancel unnecessary arrangements and try to compress the itinerary into within 3 days. So, the assistant had to change the schedule on the spot. While taking out the computer, the assistant accidentally brought out the peace amulet he had asked for earlier. Finally remembering, he hurriedly handed the amulet to Mr. Lien, hoping he could pass it to Mr. Shin upon his return. Lianju took it, wondering what it was. The assistant told him it was a peace amulet. Unsure of what gift would be appropriate for Mr. Shin, he had gone to the temple to get a peace amulet while eating at the mountaintop restaurant yesterday. Seeing the puzzled look on Lianju's face, the assistant quickly explained. According to his mother, wearing a peace amulet during one's zodiac year could bring good luck and ward off evil spirits. Surprisingly, Lianju didn't even know it was his zodiac year. The more the assistant thought about it, the more something seemed off. Suddenly, he felt that something was wrong. Mr. Lien, you couldn't possibly be unaware that yesterday was Mr. Shin's birthday, could you? Upon hearing this, scenes from yesterday suddenly flashed through Lianju's mind. Lianju stared blankly at the amulet in his hand. He asked his assistant, is a birthday really that important? Because in Lianju's memory, a birthday was just an excuse for Chen Shulien to hold a business dinner, a social occasion where one had to be generous and proper. It was about cutting a cake in front of everyone, a cake that no one actually ate. For him, birthdays were long and tiresome. He didn't understand why Shin Tingwei would feel so down. But now, knowing he missed his birthday, he also felt surprisingly upset. When asked once again by President Lien why birthdays are significant, the assistant felt immense pressure. If it's your zodiac year, then it should be important, right? Lianju fell silent for a while, then immediately asked the driver to turn around. Before meeting Shen Tingwei, Lian Zhu's only stable relationship was with an adopted son after the adoption agreement was finalized. During this time, he has also been thinking about how to further the contractual relationship with Shen Tingwei, looking for an appropriate opportunity to exchange Shen Tingwei's wedding ring for a new, suitable one. Obviously, he has already missed the best opportunity. Originally planning to head to the airport, he inexplicably directed the driver to a jewelry store instead, looking at so many rings. Lian Zhu wasn't sure which type Shen Tingwei would like, so he thought about asking his assistant to take a photo for Shen Tingwei to choose. The assistant told him to pick one himself, believing Mr. Shen would like anything he chose. Lian Zhu was so indecisive he almost ended up buying them all, but his assistant quickly stopped him, saying, "President Lian, what I meant was just choose one. After all, having too many wedding rings isn't appropriate." So after much selection, Lian Zhu finally chose a style. When the clerk asked what size was needed, Lian Zhu froze on the spot but quickly recovered. He turned to his assistant and asked him to buy a pack of waterproof children's adhesive bandages from a nearby pharmacy, specifically instructing not to get the brand and pattern wrong. It turns out that when he was previously treating Shen Tingwei's wound, he used children's adhesive bandages from Tongtong, which were about the size of his finger. He hopes the ring size will be just right for Shen Tingwei this time. Before making the call, the assistant reminded Lian Zhu to be sincere and apologetic, and it would be best to give some assurances as well. Unexpectedly, this assistant was so capable. At that moment, the call got connected, and Shen Tingwei was already on his way to the hospital. Lian Zhu told Shen Tingwei that he didn't know yesterday was his birthday. There was silence on the other end of the phone. Then Shen Tingwei said it was fine, he usually doesn't celebrate his birthday much, so it shouldn't be dwelled upon. However, what he didn't expect to hear next was Lian Zhu's apology. Shen Tingwei's heart trembled, and he clutched his clothes tightly. Despite that, he was still worried that Lian Zhu might miss his flight. At this moment, Lian Zhu had already decided not to rush for the flight. Just as he was about to continue speaking, he heard Shen Tingwei telling him to go.